All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience and getting all this started. Always is a little bit of an effort, shall we say. So, just grateful to be here alive on this wonderful Saturday, October the 8th, for another session of AIM Arts, the Anti Racism in Medicine Action Roundtable. I want to invite you all to go ahead and get your folks in. Go ahead and, as I say, ping your friends, bring your family, ping your lovers, your ex-lovers, your haters, and your players, so to speak. Your in-laws, your parents, sisters, cousins, and them, neighbors, friends, get them all up to be able to get started here on AIM Art. And so we're going to go ahead and jump into it while I await my co-hosts who are a little delayed on today, but will be here shortly. And I see Dr. Leyva is here. So thank you for being here while I get you up on stage. And there you are. And we're still waiting for Dr. Michelle, who should join us shortly. So, with that being said, and with no further ado, let's jump into it. Welcome again. I am your host, Dr. Ijeoma Nodim or Para. And some of you are curious as to what does that even mean? Does your name mean anything? Absolutely. Black people don't name our names, name our children without some meaning, whether literally or significance, shall we say. Okay. And especially those from the continent. And so my name, Ijeoma, means safe journey. Nodi means let us stay. And Opara is the title given to the firstborn son of an Igbo family. My pronouns are she, her, and all, which is Igbo for they. And I'm calling in for the original from the original unceded lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi, the Three Fires people, in the territory of Wawiatanong, otherwise known as Detroit or Motor City, Motown, 313, the comeback city, and the list goes on and on. And I also, in this moment, take the moment to recognize and honor my Igbo, African, and African diaspora ancestors, communities, and descendants. I am a physician, scholar, scientist, artist, activist, coach, consultant, speaker, mama, wife, and my personal, professional, and business mission in life is to dismantle white supremacist delusion systems, aka white violence, aka white terrorism, by eliminating anti-Black racism from medicine, healthcare, public health, and the sciences, all while centering and celebrating Black brilliance, abundance, and joy locally and globally. So again, thank you for being here. You could be anywhere else, but you choose to be here at the round table. And again, welcome. Hashtag AimArt is a transdisciplinary community of unapologetically Black, unapologetically pro-Black, libertarian, pan-African, Afrocentric, Afro-optimists. That means that we celebrate and center Black magic, Black brilliance, excellence, truth, joy, strength, assets, abundance, possibility, creativity, and future dreaming. And we are committed to developing the innovative knowledge, skills, and attitudes to inform transformative actions towards eliminating anti-Black racism in medicine, healthcare, public health, and the sciences. We meet every week. I would say mostly meet every week because as we have become more involved in transformative systemic change worldwide, our availability is certainly being, shall we say, challenged. And this is why we are evolving towards a podcast setting. And that is an ongoing process. Certainly, as we get closer to the final stages of this process, you will all be notified. We are proud of our partnerships with the number of Black folks doing great things in the community. I love blackpeople.com, led by Dr. Sinclair Skinner. Our working with them, with Howard University and Sirius FM. I'm also proud of the collaboration with Ready for Black Lives, with Sister Lena James and the Canada-US Coalition to End Race Correction in Healthcare. Proud of our partners, Black Doc Village, National Residence Council, Ubuntu Black Family Health Center, Hood Medicine, and Black Mental Health Alliance of Nashville. Also, Health Equity and Justice in Medicine of Wayne State University School of Medicine, and my company, Opara Speaks. I also want to shout out the White House Health Equity Leaders Roundtable, of which I'm a proud member, leading the work of justice and equity, all while centering Blackness. So as we get into the topic of today, Just a couple more housekeeping. We are a community of the Jumbotron baby, otherwise known as the Nest or the dashboard. And so what that means is we are all about building those resources that are required to ground our conversations. We like to dispel disinformation, misinformation, myths, and lies. And we like to lift up the truth up in this space and ground it in our science and our knowledge and truth. So always be paying attention to the Jumbotron. And if you have resources that you'd like to share, be sure to do that as well. So I already pinned the link to where we're streaming live as well. So we stream through our website. You should have that there. And the website link is right there on the Jumbotron. So we're streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter live stream, as well as here on the audio Twitter space. Okay. So if you want to participate sort of audio visually, feel free to do that. Okay. Tweet out the gems and resources that you hear, because we'll be dropping those gems in this conversation. And please hashtag AMART so that we can trend on this here bed app. And again, tag and tweet us, as well as your friends, family, and community into this space. Always feel free, never shy, to DM with any questions or comments or resources, whether on YouTube, whether on, here on Twitter space or through the DM. But also we have this thread, right, for each of the spaces. That's one of the things that Spaces has added as a feature to Twitter Spaces. So you can go ahead and tweet your comments and your questions as well on the thread, okay? And the other thing we love to do is celebrate each other. So if you have work or the services or what have you that you'd like to publicize, go ahead and tweet out a link to that. And I'm happy to go ahead and drop that in the Jumbotron in our dashboard or Nest in order to celebrate the work that we all are doing. So again, those are our usual announcements every week that we put forth. I know it takes a hot minute, but it's so important to set the room so that we all know why we're here. We always get new faces, new beautiful melanated faces in this space. And it's so important that we just level set every week so that we know why we're here, who's here, and the purpose. So folks don't go left. Okay. All right. So with that being said, we're about to jump into it. All right. I see you, Dr. Michelle. Here you are. Please accept your invitation. And now we're complete. And I see you, Dr. Vanessa. Thank you for being here. Sister Paris, thank you for being here. Shout out to everyone that's made the time. Sister Paula, thank you for being here. Every single one of you, shouting you out with thanks for being here. But let's get into why we're here on today. All right, let's get into it. Let's get into it. Okay, and I see, oh, Dr. Bryan, you're back to speaker. I don't understand. Please accept your invitation. And Dr. Michelle, same with you. Please accept your invitation to speak. Twitter is weird, and that's all I can say about that. Okay, and shout out to y'all on YouTube land and on Facebook and Twitter live stream. Shout out to y'all. Just appreciate the ways that you all are engaging in multiple ways. Just love you, and again, thank you. I am because we are because we are. Okay, it's always Ubuntu up in here. Now let's get into why we're here. You already saw the flyer, you saw the question: how does anti-Blackness cause health disparities? Okay, that's the question we're asking today. How do we speak about the quiet things out loud? Right? How do we say those quiet parts out loud? All right, when it comes to internalized anti-Blackness. All right, we talk a lot about, in this anti-racist work, we're out here breaking it down for the mind. And oftentimes, even when we're speaking with each other, right, there's always still this sort of ghost that haunts the conversation, this ghost of whiteness that truly that's the target of our conversations and of our healing practices and of our coming together. Right? It's like we're speaking against this ghost. And by the way, that ghost is still the root cause of internalized oppression and internalized anti-Blackness, internalized racism, absolutely, and internalized intersectional oppression, okay? Absolutely. But we don't name that necessarily, that piece. Well, we were forced to do that this past week, weren't we? We were forced to have a conversation about folks like Herschel Walker, Tim Scott, Clarence Thomas, Stacey Dash, Candy Williams, Kanye West, the uncles and aunties that told Grandma Harriet Tubman they didn't want they didn't want nothing to do with her Underground Railroad, right? Because what do all these people have in common, right? Right? that internalization of our own oppression. All right. And while we marinate on that, again, for those who were busy doing real life and we're not aware that your brother Kanye West, they be like, that ain't my brother. Well, your cousin, Yeezy and Candy O wore t-shirts that were inscribed with White Lives Matter. I'm gonna post that on the Jumbotron. And just with that simple act, unlocked a centuries long unspoken challenge within our communities: how to contend with white supremacist delusion when it is housed inside of Black bodies. How do we contend with white violence, white terrorism, when it is housed inside Black bodies? We understand that this is not just an individual issue, but it's systemic and it is by design. And it has broad ramifications that negatively impact our community's efforts towards liberation. Ramifications that contribute to our disparities of wealth and our disparities of physical, mental, spiritual, and cultural health as it relates to our community. So I'm looking forward to this conversation like never before. And I know I want to lift up the inherent limitations doing it on these apps and platforms that don't necessarily belong to us. But Lord knows I have heard worse on these same apps and platforms. We might as well. Even as we build our own. I always say these things are happening in parallel, even as we build our own. So let's get into it. I am honored to have this conversation with my amazing sister and brother. And by the way, my right hand, Sister Lana James, who's always with me, she's taking a sabbatical over this next month. She's been through so much. There's a lot going on with our sister, and she just needs time. And this is what I encourage, honey, taking care of ourselves, because self-care is political, okay, for Black people. But our self-care is part of our revolution and our resistance. And so she's needing to take some time off. She'll be off for about a month in order to take care of herself and attend to some priorities. And so I just want to ask you to please hold space for her, lift her up as you say your prayers, if you're someone who prays, and whatever your practice is, that you also lift her up as we lift each other up. Okay, so we won't be having her the benefit of her beautiful, awesome, powerful, fiery spirit for a month or so. But I know that when she comes back, she will be like more fire than fire, baby. And also because she has been lifted up with your blessing. So just want to lift that up. But on today, we have our amazing siblings with us. Dr. Bryan Leyva, honey, this is my brother from all my mothers. Okay, my Afro-Latino Black king up in this space doing great work. I used to call him my younger brother, but you know what? That age ain't nothing but a thing, because as much as he says I've taught him, honey, he has taught me, I believe, even more. I learned so much from his confidence and his knowledge and the work he's been doing all his life, inside and outside of medicine. And he's been saying truths and speaking truths, even people that much older than him have not even yet been able to articulate, and done so with flair and with flourish. So proud of this brother and all that he has done, is doing, and will do as he's opening up new chapters of his life. And so, Brother Bryan, I just want to welcome you to this space. You're not a stranger to AIMART. You have been a wonderful supporter, just loving, kind, and incredibly supportive. With his massive reach, he has been able to ensure that our space, this community of AIMART, has been supported, and the work of all our members of our community. He's always there pushing and promoting us, and I cannot thank you more. And so, Brother Bryan, why don't you go ahead and tell the people of the divinity of your melanation, baby, and how you just do the big things that you do. Talk about the work you've been doing, and some of the things that we just need to be sort of awaiting, staying tuned for, because I know they're great and wonderful things. As a fellow med peds physician, you just have been doing wonderful things even inside of medicine, and really breaking the mold. So go ahead and tell the people what I may have missed in your endless bio, and also talk about what you're holding space for inside of Black Joy today.
What's up, y'all? Such a blessing to be here. Guillermo, I love you. Thank you for having this space and for bringing us all together. Kanye, man.
Let's leave that brother to the side. We're gonna make time for him, but right now let's make time for us.
But I think thanks for that introduction. I think I've been working on a lot lately. I finished residency this past June. I decided to leave Minneapolis, and so I'm currently looking for work, and I've been applying for jobs and still continuing a lot of the work that I've been doing in racial justice work. A little bit about myself. I'm a physician. I'm an artist. I have a degree in studio art, and I'm an activist and I'm an organizer on the ground in pretty much every community I've lived in. I'm clinically trained in internal medicine and pediatrics, and I started Twitter maybe 2 years ago. I tweet a lot about social justice and medicine. Everything that I say is kind of shaped by my experiences and my identities. I moved to the U.S. as a child from Colombia. I am American by nationality, Colombian by ethnicity, Afro-Latino by culture, Black by race, and Pan-African by politics. I am very much invested in trying to dismantle anti-racism and white supremacy in medicine, because I think it is very much alive and well, as it is in policing and in every other racist institution in this country. But I'm just pretty much here just to be in community with you. I don't really have anything to promote. And so I'm just excited to be part of this conversation and grateful to be invited.
Amen. Well, you're promoting, Black love and Black community, okay? As we always do. So thank you so much. And I always love hearing your introduction, baby. Pan-African by politics, baby. Yes, Black by politics and Pan-African by politics as well. Loving it. Now, let's see. Sister Michelle, baby. I think our sister is having some challenges with the technology. So let me see if she's messaged me. Oh, sis, are we having some? Is Twitter not letting you be great? Yeah, she keeps getting kicked. You know what? God damn it. It's happening because of all the work you do, sis. It's because of all the work you do and the good trouble you be getting into on Twitter. That's why. Well, she'll join us when she's able to, and we'll get into the conversation. Let me just see. Maybe if I send her a link again. So say copy link and do it. Let's see if we do it this way. It's okay, sis. We understand. Let's see. Okay. So I've sent her another link through, text. Let's see if that works. And I'm sure she'll join us when she's able to. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Okay. I want to give a definition and invite your reaction, Dr. Bryan, and then we will get into some of the weeds as we connect it to health. And this is a definition, and I'm going to post it on the Jumbotron in a little bit. But while Brother Bryan is speaking, and I want to also lift up that we will be referencing, drawing from the work of the Racial Equity Tools. So racialequitytools.org is a wonderful online resource for the work of anti-racism. For those who may not be familiar, again, I'll post that up on the Jumbotron in a bit. And they have a whole page dedicated to internalized racism, and some of this work we're going to make references to as we have conversations, some of these resources. So I am going to be quoting from the amazing sister Donna Bivens, and she has, again, off of the racialequities.org, internalized racism, a definition. She has a fantastic background that she talks about. But what I want to do is just get into the definition piece, and you all can read the background, which is just outstandingly perfect. And I might reference that a little later in the conversation. We'll see. But for right now, let me talk about how Donna Bivens, is of Women's Theological Center. Women's Theological Center, WTC, is her organization. All right, so let's talk about the definitions again to level set, because some folks may be in this space talking about internalized racism. I didn't know that was a thing. It sure is. Internalized racism, what it is not. Let's talk about what it is not first before we get into the framework for what it is. So, in trying to understand, and I'm reading, quote, in trying to understand internalized racism and work towards its elimination, it is important that we do not confuse internalized racism with other realities that are frequently used to explain or describe, quote unquote, dysfunction among people of color. We need to understand that internalized racism is not simply the following: A, low self-esteem; B, color prejudice or colorism; C, stereotyping; or D, self-hatred. These may be and often are symptoms or results of internalized racism, but they're not the thing itself. We need to make this clear. Now, these may be symptoms of or results of internalized racism, but they are not the thing itself. So, what is the thing? Right? What is the thing? Internalized racism is the situation that occurs in a racist system when a racial group oppressed by racism or white supremacism or white supremacist delusion, white violence, white terrorism, supports the supremacy and dominance of the dominating group by maintaining or participating in the set of attitudes, behaviors, social structures, and ideologies that undergird the dominating group's power. It involves at least four essential interconnected elements. I'm going to read that again. Internalized racism is the situation that occurs in a racist system when a racial group oppressed by racism, and I'm adding white supremacist delusion, white supremacism, white terrorism, white violence, right? The system of these things supports the supremacy and dominance of the dominating group by maintaining or participating in the set of attitudes, behaviors, social structures, and ideologies that undergird the dominating group's power. It involves at least four essential and interconnected elements. One, decision making; two, resources; three, standards; and four, naming the problem. All right, so let's talk about decision making. Due to racism, people of color Black people do not have the ultimate decision making power over the decisions that control our lives and resources. As a result, on a personal level, we may think white people know more about what needs to be done for us than we do. On an interpersonal level, we may not support each other's authority and power, especially if it is in opposition to the dominating racial group. Structurally, there is a system in place that rewards people of color, that rewards Black people who support white supremacy and power, and coerces or punishes those who do not. Now, if y'all know how to speak another language, you better be jumping, speaking some language on today as the truth is being told. Now, let's talk about the second element of resources. Resources, broadly defined, example, money, time, salaried work, etc., are unequally distributed and unequally in the hands and under the control of white people. Internalized racism is the system in place that makes it difficult for people of color, makes it difficult for Black people to get access to resources for our own communities and to control the resources of our community. We learn to believe that serving and using resources for ourselves and our particular community is not serving, quote unquote, everybody. I got to say that again. We learn to believe that serving and using resources for ourselves and our particular community is not serving, quote unquote, everybody. There is also often a self imposed barrier that makes it difficult for us to respectfully access the resources of other peoples, especially other Black people. Now, let's talk about standards, the third element of internalized racism, or the third essential piece. Standards. With internalized racism, the standards for what is appropriate or normal, quote unquote, normal, that Black people accept are white people's or Eurocentric standards. We have difficulty naming, communicating, and living up to our deepest standards and values, and holding ourselves and each other accountable to them. Too often, we instead grab onto standards set in reaction to the abuse of white supremacism. And fourthly, naming the problem. Naming the problem. There is a system in place that misnames the problem of racism as a problem of or caused by people of color, of or caused by Black people, and blames the disease, emotional, economic, political, etc., on Black people or people of color. With internalized racism, Black people might, for example, believe we are more violent than white people and not consider state sanctioned political violence or the hidden or privatized violence of white people and the system they put in place, benefit from, and reinforce. I just want to pause so we can just process that for a little bit. We've talked about what is not, what it is, and 4 elements as a framework for understanding what internalized anti-Blackness, internalized racism is. And so with that, Brother Bryan, Sister Michelle from our run of show was going to sort of take on this, but I know that you are more than able to take on this question and this conversation point. How do you react or respond to what Sister Bivens has broken down for us in terms of what internalized racism is not and what it is? Because we got to define before we get into the meat and potatoes, or what I call the fufu and egusi soup. And so we have to break down the definition so we can level set, and then we get into the fufu and the egusi soup. So what is your reaction? What struck you? What didn't strike you? What would you add or modify based on what you've heard from Sister Donna Bivens' breakdown of internalized anti-Blackness? Brother Bryan, you're still muted.
Thank you for that amazing definition. I love that Donna Bivens article. I read it a long time ago. And for anyone who hasn't checked out that, racial equity tools.org is a great website. I think starting with definitions is so important because it sets a framework for what we're talking about. And I think it puts people in the right frame of mind. I think a lot of times when I hear conversations around internalizing anti-Blackness, they oftentimes stand around like self-hatred and stereotyping and low self-esteem. And I think that we get caught up in that, but I do think that we miss those other bigger things, right? That you alluded to, that you talked about. And particularly the one thing that I love that is included is this idea of standards and how we develop and we accept Eurocentric standards and don't come up with our own standards. And that's actually think, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's actually, I think, one of the ways in which we perpetuated a lot of health inequities through our acceptance of just the standards that we oftentimes didn't create, and oftentimes that actually harm the communities that look like us. So that, I think, particularly blinds me, that strikes me. I also think, naming the problem is also clearly something that we're seeing this week, right? That often we fail to name it. And I think that one of the things that internalized racism does, or as a form of internalized oppression, is that it causes blind spots, and it causes us to not see the thing right before our eyes. And so I think that also is something that really resonates with me, and it's oftentimes what is most frustrating as an observer when I see instances like this is it's frustrating to see how something that's so visible to me and to others sometimes is so invisible to the person that's committing, or that I'm looking at, for example. And I also think that the whole idea of resource is also really interesting, right? And how and you oftentimes see this a lot, especially and this is a lot of times leads me to feel frustrated when Black people get in positions of power, where you finally, there's this sense of discouragement. Oftentimes we feel a little disappointed or discouraged because you feel like finally, maybe they're going to finally use their power to level resources or more distribute resources to communities, like to our communities. But then oftentimes when they get into those positions, they fail to do that. And a lot of times it's because it feels to me that they maybe feel that doing so might not be fair, or somehow in the process of getting socialized into the new role, they buy into this notion that transferring resources and being bold about resource distribution is unfair. Or, for example, saying that I want to increase admission spots for Black and brown students, and being bold and giving a percentage is unfair to white students, right? Or so somehow in the process of doing that, they lose sight of they start adopting this anti-Black attitude. And so I think that those were just some of the aspects of the definitions that really stood out to me.
Oh no, I appreciate that so much. And yes, oh Lord, yes. Oh, gospels all around. And I mean, where to even sort of begin with that? And you really broke it down beautifully. And again, not to, and I think it's important to emphasize, not to say that self-hatred and low self-esteem and all those pieces are not parts of internalized racism. We're not saying that's not what's being said. We're saying that is just the tip of the ice. If that's the tip of of the iceberg, right? It's not the thing itself. It's elements of the thing. It's features, shall we say? However, it is so in key, and that piece you said about naming, that we name what it is, because you can't end or change or solve a problem you haven't defined. And you can define anything without a name. And that is so incredibly powerful that you lifted up. And when we talk about the t-shirts held around the world, right? Literally wearing on melanated skin white supremacism, like literally, you cannot have a picture, you cannot have an infographic more graphic, pun intended, than that in illuminating all four of these elements: the standards, the resources, the naming the problem, all four of these elements, right? The decision making. So I appreciate you really highlighting and illustrating that. And I'd like us to then sort of get more explicit around why this is dangerous. Because you were part of this conversation, Dr. Bryan. I was following your analysis of the situation, and there was pushback, and there is, and not to say that this pushback is not justified, especially when we talk about the intersectionality of oppressive systems, namely capitalism, right? And how this is linked to attention seeking for the purpose of making profits. And so there was some pushback, like, y'all don't give this man oxygen. Don't give him the attention he desires. If we ignore them, both of them, they will go away. And you lovingly pushed back against that now. And please talk about why, and why it is important to begin to have these conversations in the context of the danger it presents in general, and also in terms of our health. But let's keep the health piece to the side. We'll get into that in a little bit. Just talk about why it is important that you push back in the way that you did, why it's important to still name this inside of the intersectionality of capitalism and money, and why it is so dangerous for us, which is what necessitates these conversations being had.
Thanks, Shipam. I mean, I think a lot of people, when I was talking about it, they were giving me the same feedback. Well, you're just giving him oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
If you stay quiet, he'll just go away. And it made me wonder, well, he's been doing this for such a long time. He's not going away, right? Racist people and racist systems don't go away. And anti-Black systems and anti-Black people don't go away. Anti-Blackness and racism and white supremacy, they have a way of mutating,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a way of perpetuating themselves in itself, right?
Mm.
And so, what I think was important to realize about Kanye is that this man has so much reach, and that the media is gonna follow this man no matter what you and I do with our smaller platforms. And I thought that it was our responsibility to actively push back, not because I'm necessarily paying mind to what Kanye, but because I'm paying mind to the messages that he's sending out. And I'm realizing that not everyone has the context, right? There are going to be people who are going to be coming into this conversation, maybe not even understanding what took place in 2013 with Trayvon Martin, like not even understanding the history of Black Lives Matter, and where, like why White Lives Matter is a white supremacist statement. So unless you understand the history of Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter is going to seem is not going to seem problematic. And so for me, it's really important that we go back and revisit that history, so that people understand that history, because I think the history of Black people is important, and that the history of Black resistance is important. Likewise, I think it's also, I also think it's important that people understand the history of white rage, right? So that we don't keep repeating it. And so for me, it was really valuable that we actually talk about what's happening, because I also think this conversation that we're having about internalized anti-Blackness has always been a taboo. I mean, it's been a taboo in the literature. When you talk about racial justice literature, this is the conversation that we don't often talk about. And part of it is because there's this fear that we're going to shift away attention from white supremacy, right? And systems perpetuated by white people, right? And so, which we wouldn't want to do, right? I mean, right? It's like why talk about black and black crime when we're just tons of white people committing heinous atrocities? You know what I'm saying? So I understand the fear of doing that. But it is something that needs to be dealt with. And so for me, I just felt that for all of us that understand that history, we can't allow these type of systems these type of statements and these types of behaviors to go undiscussed, to go unchallenged, because they have real implications on the lives of people. And so I just felt that it was important that people actively actually discuss it and not just let it rock, because he's not going to go away. And you saw this right after. I mean, he doubled down, right? The guy doubles down, and And again, he's emboldened. He's emboldened white supremacists. He's going to embolden, probably a new generation of younger white folks who think that there's nothing wrong with making statements like this. This is dangerous. And so I just felt that it was really important that all of us come together and really have a conversation about it.
And I want to talk about, again, I want to be even more explicit around the danger, right? And what you said around the fact that this needs to be discussed. And I've been sitting with a particular question, which we're going to visit in a bit. But bringing it back to the danger. You talk about the emboldening of white supremacism, right? The emboldening of white violence, because there's now a justification, because they can hang these ideologies on the bodies, quite literally hang these ideologies, okay, on black human mannequins to justify these beliefs, right? Like CCC, even one of them is saying ... right? And what is fascinating about that is, and I have to find this link so I can put it on the Jumbotron. By the way, y'all, I added and thank you. Someone was like, put that resource. I've added the racialequities.org link, as well as a link directly to Ms. Donna Bivens' definition of internalized racism. It's on the Jumbotron. And I'll put it in our little thread that's going. And thank you all for engaging on the thread. Shout out to everybody. And I'll be definitely lifting up your voices as we have the conversation. But yeah, when we think through the ways in which it justifies white supremacist delusional lies, myths, and legends, so to speak. And so the link I was referring to is on Instagram. Somebody posted about, there was a white boy, young man, who was holding up a Black Lives Matter sign somewhere in the South. I don't know where exactly. I don't want to tell a tale. I don't know what state it was or city. And by the way, I just want to lift up Stacey Adams. Brian, what's the name of our Georgia governor, soon to be Georgia governor? Stacey Abrams. That's right. Forgive me. Stacey Adams is the shoe. Forgive me, y'all. I haven't eaten lunch. And so, Stacey Abrams, and please, nobody ever tell her I fumbled at her name. Please, Lord. She's like one of my sheroes, and I will never live the embarrassment down. But Stacey Abrams had an interview with NPR this morning. I was listening to her. And I remember her, commenting, referencing Uncle Malcolm X, honey. And she said, let's be clear, as Brother Malcolm said, everything beneath the U.S.-Canadian border is the American South. I mean, I was like, that was the word. I needed that word for the entire weekend, baby. That reminder. Everything beneath the Canadian-U.S. border is the American South. I said, sis, if you don't say that again. And she was responding to a question as to how ironic it is that possibly the first Black woman governor in the history of the United States is going to be in the South, which is her, for Georgia, because that's what's going to happen. Okay, I don't care what nobody says. Argue with your mama. She's going to be Georgian governor. Okay. And so, and she said, well, yeah, but also let's think about it. And she broke it down that way. Anyway, not to digress too much, but to come back to the point around the fact that wherever this was in the South, but you could replace the South with any state and city in the U.S. That's my point of reference in that comment by the great Stacey Abrams. This young white boy, this young, he's a young man, probably a teenager, someone in his 20s, holding up a Black Lives Matter sign. Y'all probably saw that clip. And the hate that was spewed by people driving by, all the things that these people said, there was nothing they didn't say to abuse him, from calling the boy himself the N-word to all kinds of, I didn't even know you could cuss people out like this in English, the things that I heard these people say. Okay, so it's really interesting the mechanisms of white supremacy when it acts on an interpersonal level. Because let's be clear, we're talking about systems here. I want us to not lose sight of that. There's the internalized. We know that systems of oppression and specifically the oppression or the oppressive system of white violence, white terrorism, white delusional, white supremacist delusion, um, acts on multiple levels, on a systemic and structural level, on an institutional level, on an interpersonal level, and on an internalized level, which is what we are talking about today, but often not discussed. And that was one of the questions I've been grappling with. And I want to lift up in this moment, Brother Bryan, is why don't we talk about or want to talk about or stay away from or avoid discussing the ways in which white violence operates on an internalized level within our community? Why is it so difficult to have this conversation? And I have some thoughts, but I'm wondering your thoughts as to why it's something we just don't often want to bring up. Is it that we're embarrassed? Is it that we're afraid that we'll be giving credence to white supremacy? Is it why is it something that we struggle? Even having this conversation today took a lot of preparation and conversation, and so I just wonder what is it within us that how that allows us or to sort of avoid and not address this very very cogent expression of white supremacy.
I think part of it is it reveals the ways and the mechanisms in which oppression is reproduced, and it leads to, or it can lead to, victim blaming. It can lead to moving attention away from racist institutions, racist practices that privilege white people at the expense of people of color. And so I think that is disconcerting, right? So I think to move attention away from what we feel is the bigger problem, I think can be hard. I think to want to steer the conversation away, especially because it's already so hard to get white people to even think about racism and to even name it. So why even muddy the picture? I think sometimes it can feel that way. Like, why even talk about this other issue when we can't even get you to even think about this one? I think also there's some, I think sometimes it's hard to admit. We sometimes are like, we don't want, the idea of like the effects of racism are so much bigger than we would even like to admit. Like, they're even affecting me, right? It's like when we think about biases, right? Or like, it's fine when it affects these systems or when it affects them, but the fact that it can affect me and that I'm susceptible to it, as a Black person, like that is, that's a hard pill to swallow, right? Like, even I'm susceptible to it. Like, what kind of failure I am as a Black person that even I swallowed, drank the water, I drank the Kool-Aid. So I think that there's that maybe that sense of like possibly even guilt or shame, and I think that there's no spaces also to deal with that and to talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you don't have any place to process that, those feelings of like, maybe, hey, was I anti-Black just now by maybe thinking that, I don't know, maybe not supporting my colleague in the way that maybe I should have? Like, was I, was that, where was that coming from? And if I don't have any place to really talk about that in a supportive environment with folk like me who are going to understand and who might be supportive and I can have those conversations, then those conversations never happen. And so part of it is, and I say that because I think part of it is also a systemic problem. We don't have the spaces to talk about it. Those spaces are not cultivated in our work environments. And so part of it is the institutions also have to take responsibility about that too. Is that just like white supremacy is a system of oppression and racism is a system of oppression, internalized racism, like we just talked about, it's not only internalized, and it's not a problem of the person, right? And I think even the term internalized racism, I think sometimes like the term, it can make it feel like the problem involves like the person because they themselves are internalizing it. Set up the system, right? And so I think that, and that's why there's been like other terms that have been proposed, like as opposed to like some people have called it like appropriated racial oppression, as basically because it as a way of like getting putting not putting as much blame or on the person who's actually internalizing it, but really thinking more about the system. But I think that there's also we also got to hold systems accountable for not creating spaces for us to really address this system of oppression that exists within our community. And so those are some of the reasons why I believe that there has been this has been a neglected aspect of racism conversations.
Yeah. Now, I appreciate that. And I also appreciate the challenge there in terms of causing us to start to think alternatively around, well, even the term itself, does it sort of locate the problem? We talk about this, right? The power of language, right? And how language reinforces even as it even produces oppression, and how oppression produces and reinforces language, and that cycle there, and how it's important to, again, goes back to that naming piece. How do we language and message these realities? And when we shine the light away from systems and we obscure the role of systems, right? We then cause these systems to, we remove the agency, right, and the role and the power of systems to produce these realities we're contending with. We locate that instead inside of the individual. We never solve the problem, right? But we understand that these two things are intersectional and interdependent, and they speak to each other, because people create and uphold systems, even while systems create and uphold individuals. And so how do we ensure that we're straddling both, and we're naming that connectivity, and we don't ever want to victim blame, victim shame, and locate the problem on the individual, what was produced by an entire system. And Sister Donna Bivens understood that, and that's why she wrote this document, which we've shared. And I want to read from it because she names what you're talking about. And I think, I mean, her words are much more eloquent than I could ever muster. I think it's important to provide the context, which you've done, and then to specifically name how, quote unquote, internalized racism lives inside of that, even as we are, because we're always in the process of creating language, aren't we? It's part of the work of liberation. It's part of the work of our humanization and our always needing to remind ourselves and reinforce our dignity. It's owning language. Is how do we take ownership back, right? Is that Kujik Chagulia, self-determination. And part of self-determination is language creation. So I am very interested in, and for y'all in the audience listening, do you know of alternative terms and lexicon around internalized racism or internalized anti-Blackness that you'd like to share, that we can start discussing if those are better terms that really does name the root cause better and locates the responsibility where it needs to be located, which is the systems of white supremacist delusion, and not on the individuals per se necessarily. Not saying that we don't have roles to play, but saying that it is not the root cause. It did not originate from within us, but was placed upon us as another tool of reinforcing white hegemony, reinforcing white terrorism, reinforcing white supremacist delusion. So I want to read from the background that I was referencing in the beginning of our conversation, but I think it really speaks to what you're talking about, Brother Bryan. And just to let y'all know out there again, please pay attention to before I go into the reading, the nest or the jumbotron, and particularly our website, and sign up, because we are developing materials and newsletters, and we want to make sure that we are keeping you engaged in the AIM Art community. So if you want to go ahead and sign up and be part of the AIM Art community, we had the Google form, but we then, because girl, we got to grow, and so we moved from the Google form, God bless Google, to the website formats, and shout out to Brother Benny of Black Mental Health Alliance of Nashville, who's been helping us with our technology, because you already know your girl ain't got it within her. That ain't not part of my anointing. And so therefore we need each other, right? And so Brother Benny has been helping us with that. So go ahead on the Jumbotron. The first post is a link to the YouTube streaming, but also the website. And there's a place there to drop your contact so that we can make sure you're part of the community. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hear what Sister Donna has for us. So she says, quote, from our work at Women's Theological Center, we have come to see racism and the internalization of racism as the primary assaults on our love for ourselves and each other. Now, I understand love here as our ability to care for ourselves and each other spiritually, emotionally, physically, and intellectually, and to do it in a way that does not split us off from ourselves, body from mind, spirit from emotion, individual from community, and so forth. Like most progressive anti racism trainers, we define racism as having to do with power, separating it from the human flaws we all share, such as prejudice and scapegoating. We see racism as a system of oppression based on race that in this country is perpetrated by white people against Black people and other people of color. It involves an unequal distribution of systemic power for people with white skin privilege in four main areas. One, the power to make and enforce decisions. Two, access to resources broadly defined. Three, the ability to set and determine standards for what is considered appropriate behavior. And four, the ability to define reality. This inequality is generally the result of a history of colonialism, genocide, and oppression, in which the material, intellectual, spiritual, and emotional resources of one people are put in service of another through force, deception, and disrespect for their ways, aka violence. The struggle against racism. Okay, so we'll end there. And then I want to move to this. In the meantime, the racism manifests as a relentless attack on the individual and collective lives of Black people and people of color. We experience this attack as violence against our heads, minds, bodies, and spirits that often results in some form of internalization, not to mention our decreased life expectancies, again, broadly defined. But internalized racism is not simply a result of racism. In doing this work, we have come to see it as a systemic oppression with a life of its own. That is, not only is there a system in place that upholds the power of white people, there is a system in place that undermines the power of people of color, that undermines the power of Black people, and teaches us to fear our own power and difference. Seeing internalized racism as a systemic oppression allows us to distinguish it again from human wounds of self-hatred or quote unquote low self-esteem to which all people are vulnerable. It is important to understand it as systemic because that makes it clear that it is not a problem simply of individuals. It is structural. Thus, even Black people and people of color who have high self-esteem, quote unquote, must grapple with internalized racism. Honey, say that again. We must understand internalized racism as a system to be grappled with in the same way that even the most committed anti-racist white people must continue to grapple personally and in community with their own and their white people's racism until the oppressive structures, ideologies, and systems are abolished and replaced. In putting forward a definition of internalized racism that is systemic and structural, we are not in any way suggesting that people of color, that Black people are not in any way, I apologize, let me start again. In putting forward a definition of internalized racism that is systemic and structural, we are not in any way suggesting that Black people and people of color, quote unquote, blame the victim. However, we are saying that the resources of Black people doing anti-racism should be channeled as much as possible into other Black people, into helping each other to understand and confront the systemic nature of racism and internalized racism. I want to end there, but baby, you want to read this document because this is me. This is why AMART exists, because we have to, Brother Bryan, we talk about the danger, right? And we've talked about numerous dangerous aspects to the internalization of racism. But I really want to name what she's also lifting up here, which is the loss of resources. We spend so much time trying to, again, like you said, pursue white folks and convince them of this, that, and the third, trying to dismantle this system of that, this, and the third inside of white violence and the systems of white violence. We are not paying attention to ourselves and the ways in which we are traumatized chronically, right, intergenerationally from these systems of oppression, and that one of the traumatic responses is this internalization of racism, internalization of anti-Blackness. That is part, again, of the weapons of white supremacism, of white supremacist delusion. So, and when we don't pay attention to ourselves and we're not doing that work of community healing, how does that show up in our bodies? And she lifted up that life expectancy shortening. How does that show up in our telomeres? How does that show up in our blood pressure? How does that show up in our glycemic index? How does that show up in our autoimmune system? How does that show up in our very cellular structures? How does that show up in our nervous system, in our gastrointestinal system, in our cardiovascular system, in our renal system, and the list goes on? How does it show up in our bodies? Because the body keeps the score. And so I want us to talk about, as we are rounding up this portion of the roundtable, and y'all in the audience, please go ahead and start requesting the mic to speak, because I know you have a lot to say about this. This is a time to start doing that so we can get you up on the round table. But Brother Bryan, how does this connect to health? I want us to, again, name why this is one of the dangers inside of our health and the contribution to health disparities when we talk about the internalization of anti-Blackness.
You just dropped so many gems. Definitely everyone check out this article. It's just such a key article in anti-racism work. I wanted to just, one term that I like to use when talking about internalized racism is mental colonization. I think whiteness colonizes our institutions and our policies, but it also colonizes our minds. Mm-hmm. So when I think about unlearning racism, I think about mental decolonization, and a lot of times when I think about unlearning internalized racism, I think about like decolonizing the mind, and that's just another way of thinking about it that I like to propose. I also wanted to touch on, and I'll go back to kind of this idea of how internalized racism relates to health, but we talked about how internalized racism is not just a belief, it's not just believing negative stereotypes, but it is a system. Mm-hmm. It's also supported by white folk. And so I'll give you one example that comes to mind. Part of internalized racism involves the belief that white cultural values are superior to our own. Mm-hmm. And part of that involves this idea that like we oftentimes have to seek approval from white people in everything that we do. Mm-hmm. And that we use white expectations as the yardstick for determining what is good, what is desirable, what is necessary, what is healthy. And we see this a lot in even how we conduct research, right? And like white people are oftentimes seen as the standard. Mm-hmm. They are the metric that we use for determining health outcomes. Our racial disparities are measured against white people, life expectancy mm-hmm. white mm-hmm. people. Mm-hmm. And that is problematic and that is racist. And I'll tell you why. White people have the freedom to have imagination. They have the freedom to dream. And I've literally like have wrestled. I was at the NIH and I've like thought about this and I've had conversations about this. Like, I don't want to always use white people as my metric for my, like, sometimes I just want to improve life expectancy. I want Black people to have life expectancy to 150. I don't want it to be to 80 something like white people. No, I want it to be to 150, period. But I can't. Right? Whereas white people, they don't have a metric. Their metric is whatever the hell they dream of. They have imagination. They can say, I want our life expectancy to be X. And that is the studies that where our goal for this study and for this drug is to improve our blood pressure to this. Like everything that their yardstick is whatever they came of. Same thing for our, when you're talking about education and teachers, like we can't, when you're writing grants, and this is why I say it's a system, because white institutions then reinforce this. If you're writing a grant to try to get funding for an educational program to improve, let's say, glycemic index, the first thing they're going to ask you is, what is your metric? Right? And what is your standard? What are you trying to, then they'll ask you, what is, and then your metric is always like, your metric is always the white standard. And you can't not include that as metric. Right? Like, what is the disparity that you're trying to reduce? Same thing with test score. What are you trying to, your test scores? Well, I'm trying to make it so that I reduce the disparity. Well, I don't want that to be my metric. Right? And so I think that, and I say this because our institutions then reinforce this idea that this white expectation, that this white standard has to be what is desirable and what is good, and we can't have the freedom to dream. So that's just like one way in which, that's why we say it's a system. It's like a system where we are subscribing to it, but it is also then forced upon us, even when we try to push back. But to go back to your question around, how does it affect health? I mean, I think the first thing is that it's directly related to health, right? So there's studies that show that internalized racism score, like the higher you have, the higher your internalized racism scores, the worse your mental health outcomes are going to be. So, for example, Mazoon and McLean, they did a study using the National Survey of American Life, and they saw that they found an association between internalized racism as measured by like negative stereotypes and beliefs about one's racial groups and like serious psychological distress. And they found it across Black women, so African American women, Caribbean Blacks. They found that the higher your internalized racism scores were, the more you're likely to have serious psychological distress. But they found that if you had higher self-esteem and higher racial identities, if you were less likely to, or it was protective against the distress with internalized racism. So I think there's also studies that show internalized racism is related to like youth violence among African American males, and even domestic violence and Native American populations. So in terms of like the direct links between internalized racism and health, there are studies that really literally linked the two. So the direct contributor to poor health outcomes. But then on top of that, I think it also adds like indirectly through the effects that it has on Black people and the ways that it causes blindness in many ways, in us recognizing the ways in which racism and white supremacy operates in our lives and also in the places that we work. It oftentimes prevents us from supporting or leading initiatives that support racial justice or that promote health equity and medicine. So sometimes it can prevent us from supporting initiatives that are in the best interest of Black people, whether that's universal health care or like race-explicit health interventions. It can prevent us from speaking up against initiatives or policies that directly harm us. So, for example, admissions criteria that rely on standardized testing, or it can even sometimes prevent us from sticking together around initiatives that will benefit us as a group. And so I think that the ways that internalized racism directly leads to health inequities is numerous. One is through the effects that it that it has on health, but also through the effects that it has on our behaviors. So, like again, if the anti-racism is the active process of naming and confronting racism by changing systems, structures, policies, and attitudes so that power is distributed and shared equally, then how do we change and confront racism when we can't even change it and confront it within ourselves? So I'll end in just posing that question, like how do we do that if we can't even name it and confront it within ourselves?
Powerful question for us to how do we name and confront the systems and structures of anti-blackness inside of white supremacist delusion externally if we haven't done it within ourselves? And y'all, if you all were part of our series that we did here on the round table a few months ago, we had the 5 keys to effective organizing. And if you all remember the first key, and this is how I teach and do my work, you have to start with self. You have to start with self. As Black peoples, we all were born into the Kool-Aid, into the amniotic sac of anti-Blackness and white violence. That is the system that has been created. We didn't choose it. There's no way you didn't swallow a little bit. There's no way I didn't swallow a little bit. And I confront it within myself every day. I have to, because otherwise I'm not true to this work. I can't be out here saying I'm doing this work and I'm not in the process of doing that healing work within myself. And if we, like you said, the blind spot, if we lie to ourselves and we're delusional, right, to ourselves that we are somehow separate of it, then you are a problem and not a solution. Period. Because we will be out here perpetuating what is the default or the status quo. I want to appreciate Brother Bryan, you lifting up. And again, before I do that, shouting out everyone, go ahead and request to speak. Now is the time as we are rounding up. So this is your time to request to speak. And even if you're not sure what you want to say, I want to encourage you to just go ahead and request anyway, because by the time you're sure you want to say something, that's when we're about to close. And I'm trying to be respectful of everybody's time and really help us keep to a good time for these spaces, okay? So that people come back. Otherwise, people, I ain't come back to that long ass room. So you want us, and I know we like to be with each other, and we could be with each other literally all day. But no, again, self-care is resistance and revolutionary. So you want time off these apps so that you can go walk in nature, you can go, drink water, you can eat fufu and egusi soup, you can eat stockfish and okra, you can eat fried fish, all of these good proper foods, okay? So and be with your loved ones. You want to go and make love, okay? And just enjoy yourself. So I don't want us to be on these apps all day. I want us to spend a reasonable amount of time on it, but then go out and be in the world and be with yourself and be with your creator and your community. That's health. All right. So now back to what we're saying. So thank you. I see already folks that have picked up. Yes. You are welcome. Just go ahead and be muted and just put your hands up so I know that you want to speak and call on you when it's time. So Brother Bryan, going back to what you were saying, I love that you use the word mental colonization, because we are a Pan-African people, okay, and a Pan-African space. And I want to name that there are people here that in the round table that were not born here necessarily. I was trying to remind us that white supremacy is global. All right, these white supremacists, I'm always trying to, and again, for those that may be wondering, yes, I'm intentional about saying white supremacist delusion, or the systems of white supremacist delusion, or white supremacism, or white terrorism, or white violence, because Black people have taught me that they are not comfortable. A lot of us are not comfortable with that term because it reinforces white hegemony. And if I'm anything, I do my best to make sure I'm listening to my people. And so, especially especially Black people, Black women, especially, and Black queer folks. So it is important that our language, going back to what Brother Bryan was referencing a while ago, our language reinforces liberation. that our language reinforces our self-determination, right? And that it doesn't reinforce the status quo of white hegemony and white violence. So this is why I use that term for those who might be wondering why she's saying that, because it's more common to hear white supremacy. I'm referencing the same system. It's the same system, but I'm changing the language because that is the one of the ways that we have to actively unlearn what Brother Bryan referenced. Unlearn. And if you wanted a trick to where do I start? Start with language, y'all. Start with language. So, Brother Bryan, thank you for saying global mental colonization, because we know that decolonization, anti-colonial work starts with the mind. And to that point, one of our wonderful sisters actually put a quote in the system, I mean, in the thread, and says, and there's so many quotes of great quotes about this, but I want to lift up what Anne said. This is from Mummy Shakur. And so Anne put this quote, people get used to anything. The less you think of your oppression, the more your tolerance for it grows. After a while, people just think oppression is the normal state of things. But to become free, you have to be acutely aware of being a slave. What I will amend there is you have to be acutely aware of being enslaved. Of being enslaved. We know that there were enslaved Africans that didn't want to jump. That's why I referenced them on the Underground Railroad. You know that, right? When Mama Harriet Tubman was like, let's go on to freedom, y'all, let's go. There were enslaved people that were like, maybe not. We know that. Every oppressed group, every single one, have people that internalize their oppression in the ways that has been broken down, these four elements, especially around our agency to make change. And that, to me personally, is the ultimate danger, is that it prevents us from doing the work of our liberation. It prevents us from doing the things that we need to do, from coming together in the ways we need to come together in order to set ourselves free. And isn't that the very function of these systems of delusional white supremacy? Isn't that the very function of it? To maintain itself by, as Sister Donna says, undermining the power, not just maintaining their power, but to simultaneously undermine our power or our belief in our power to create and imagine and liberate. Isn't that the very function of it? So to me, the ultimate, in addition to all the dangers that have been lifted up, I think they're all a common sort of through line and a thread through it all is therefore the internalized belief that we are powerless to set ourselves free, when the only people really that set us free were ourselves. And this is true throughout the diaspora. I want to really name this, because a lot of people that look like you are out here really thinking that this is an American reality. We always keep saying this over and over again. White supremacy is America and Europe's greatest export. Greatest export. Next to it, guns. But white supremacy is the greatest export from this part of the world, from the global minority world. And so it is so important, again, going back to the naming. Listen, if we do nothing else but name, you've done more than enough, right? That we name that it is indeed a mental colonization, and part of why we struggle throughout the diaspora in the continent, in the Caribbean, and trying to get ourselves out of the position we were put in, granted income for ourselves, is that mental colonization, is that belief that we are not good enough to do what we're supposed to, because we were taught that, and through no fault of our own, many of us actually believe it. If we don't say it, we cannot change it. So we must say it, as painful as it is. It hurts me to even say this, but it must be said, so that we can what? We can start to grow. We can start to undo those shackles of bondage. So, Brother Bryan, thank you again, really, for the awesome just what you just broke down was just outstanding. And then I wanted to make sure that we name that this shows up in our health. It shows up, and I think Anne said our epigenetics. Yes, it shows up in our telomeres. Telomeres are those part of our genes whose length is representative of our longevity. So you live as long as your telomeres. Is basically the case. But those of us who are survivors of oppression and violence, systemically, structurally, interpersonally, and internalized, have shortened telomeres, hence our premature lifespans, our premature death, and our shortened longevity. It's as a result of surviving these systems of oppression. So it shows up in our bodies, y'all. It shows up in our health, and it directly impacts our health outcomes, predisposing us to these diseases of oppression, as I call them, and both directly, literally, physiologically on our bodies. But then it also shows up in our, and I love that Brother Bryan said this, in our behaviors that result in us not doing the things we need to do collectively, right? To set ourselves free in the sense of supporting certain policies, both institutionally, but also governmentally, and in our families, in our neighborhoods, etc., because of this belief in the lies of white supremacism. I want to lift up, before we have folks speak, and thank you for coming up on stage, I just want to lift up the comments in the thread. MC, very spiritual something. Speak on it, Dr. Para. Shout out, family. I thank you. I hail you. And thank you, MC, for teaching us that. Oh, thank you so much. And you reminded me, I'm going to get that Instagram clip I was referencing. And MC tells us that it was in Arkansas. So thank you so much. I will get that up. So that Instagram clip where I said the white boy was holding up the Black Lives Matter sign, y'all, it was in Arkansas. So thank you for that. And as you know, I've posted the reference that you're referencing. Anne is also lifting you up, Brother Bryan, saying we need spaces to get clean. Who say that again? We got to have a space for us to square off. She says square off with the notion that we drank the Kool-Aid without shame and degradation. So important. We don't have time for that. Okay? I don't say we drank it. It was fed to us and it went down the gullet. But we don't need no shame, no degradation. We need that healing. And as always, I always shout out Community Healing Network, y'all. Community Healing Network, I'll put that link up, is one of the great spaces I found online for our collective just healing. The NAP ministry, y'all, if you don't follow the NAP ministry, that's another account that also lifts our collective healing up. So no, we ain't got time for the shame and degradation. It's just love in here. Frantz Fanon, Aliyah talks about Frantz Fanon when he talks about the Black psyche within a white colonized world. Yes, and I have my wonderful sister Idil here, who talks about madness and talks about, the produced madness of what it means to be a Black person in a white, violently white, colonized world, and how it affects and impacts our behaviors. I mean, she can articulate it beautifully. Sister Idil, I hope you come up, Sister Abdullahi, that you come up and you talk more about that, because she's just a genius in this space. But absolutely, Frantz Fanon references that. Thank you. Hello, my name is Carl, I think. Let me see what your whole thing is called. What's your whole? My name is Carolyn. Okay, thank you, Carolyn. And she's, shouting out the space. Yes, and at Nat the Phoenix, y'all, we're talking about this. I hope you come up and talk about what you've been discussing. And thank you, pre-med, biomed student, for being here and being awesome. And then USCF Center, you want us to advertise something? Okay, we'll put that on the Jumbotron. Is it shouting out Black folks though? I gotta look through it and see what it's doing. All right. Epigenetics also, and shout out. Thank you. Veronica, Danqua, everybody, love you all. All right. So now we have folks that want to speak. Sister Dr. Day, I hope you come up too. I see the amazing Arnaldo Diaz Vasquez. You do great work online. Always happy to follow you. Thank you for your eternal support. I hope that you come up to speak as well. My wonderful sister Pascal in the building, come up as well to speak. I hope you all come up, even if it's just for a word. It means so much to hear your voices on this. And so, with no further ado, let's go ahead and start with Brother Achang Antoine. to break some things down for us, and then we'll go to Sister Paula as well. Again, y'all are want to speak, go ahead and request. We are going to end on time, which is 3 o'clock. We're yeah, listen, I've been praying, and I told the ancestors to pinch me if we go a minute over. So y'all, please help your girl be successful and request to speak now and and not at 2:59. I'm begging you in the name of our collective mothers. Okay, all right, love you, brother. You have some things to bless the space with. You are welcome. Go ahead and talk your talk.
Yes, my name is Archange Antoine, and Dr. Joma and Brother Bryan, just thank you so much for just pouring into us both the information and also the sense of urgency. I think for me, number one, it's always good to get affirmed in some of my thinking, and I'm happy that you also posted the resources because I just believe that we have to move this beyond a conversation, and this should be a curriculum and a training that all Black organizations across the country are adopting, because this is part of a major barrier that is preventing us from progressing even further and farther and more collective. So again, I just want to say I'm also doing some of this work in the Black church, and so looking forward to continue learning, partnering, growing together. And again, I just want to thank you for your spirit of just unity and just trying to help everyone see the importance of living into these this sense of urgency. So thank you.
Thank you, Brother Antoine. I just love you. Just met you, just love you. And just everything you shared. Thank you for the work you're doing with the Black churches, because baby, did you bring up another texture to this conversation? Okay. And I was mindful of the time, but you already know we could just unpack this in so many spaces. And I'm curious about the intersectionality with religion. Baby, you already know about this myth of this curse of Ham. Honey, I didn't know about this curse of Ham. If anybody knows a resource that breaks it down, please go ahead and send it to me so I can put it on the jumbotron. Or if you're a speaker, you could put it yourself on the jumbotron, baby. But that there's a curse of Ham. Black people are cursed, baby. And this is in our churches. And some of our churches believe this. They believe this and perpetuate it. Some of the most anti-Black shit you will hear sometimes from the pulpit. We have to talk about the ways in which religiosity intersects with internalized anti-Blackness. We have to talk about the ways in which classism intersects with internalized anti-Blackness. We have to talk about the ways in which misogyny and sexism, y'all, intersect with internalized anti-Blackness. We have to talk about the ways in which ableism, nationalism, we hear about that a lot on this bird app, intersects with anti-Blackness. We have to talk about how heteronormativity and homophobia and transphobia intersects with internalized anti-Blackness. We can't be free until we are addressing all these pieces that cause us to look like members of our family, like they're less than, because we have internalized that we are less than because they wear additional identities as humans in this world. I just want us to sit with that, because sometimes if we don't name that, we out here thinking like we good. But then we talk about each other a certain kind of way because another member of our family has an identity that we've been taught to hate. And that is not good. And I understand that I am talking about a symptom. We're not talking about the thing. But where do those symptoms, who are themselves systems, right? We know that ableism is a system of its own. We know that patriarchy, misogyny, sexism is a system of its own, classism, etc. And so as a system, how do those intersect with the system of internalized anti-Blackness or mental colonization, whatever term that we are evolving? But that means the ways in which we look at ourselves using those four elements as a framework. I'll remind everyone about that at the end. When we close out. But how do those intersect with and integrate those additional systems when we talk about how we show up in the world and what we need to unlearn to truly show up liberated. And so I thank you, Brother Antoine, for lifting that up, because it did remind me of that piece. I've been sitting with that in this conversation as well. So thank you for that. Brother Bryan, is there anything you wanted to say to what Brother Antoine mentioned? And then we'll move to Sister Paula.
I just appreciate hearing him in this space, and hopefully we get to hear a little bit more from him and how those conversations show up in church. I think they show up differently, and I'm just.
I lost you, Brother Bryan. I'm sure you'll come back. And again, when we talk about church, and that's why I say religiosity, I want to talk about it in the mosque too, honey. In Islam, in Buddhism, in Judaism, and how does it show up in the systems of religion, right? As well. Christianity being primarily, because a lot, not majority, but a lot of us are integrated or inculcated or indoctrinated in the church, but there's a hell of a lot of us in different religions as well. And so just talking through how these things speak to or not and intersect with the internalization of our own anti, because I have seen some things, baby. I've heard whoo chat. So it is a powerful piece of our conversation. So thank you, Brother Bryan. Are you back online?
I guess I'll just add just like one thing that I would be interested in hearing is a lot of times the way that I think anti-Blackness shows up in our community is a lot of times through blaming on culture and behavior.
Yes.
And you saw this was, before there was, like, I think in the 30s, there was an understanding that there was systemic poverty and that the ways that affected Black people. But I think there was this governmental push to start blaming Black people for their own oppression in the 1960s, for example. And you saw a lot of Black people adopting those attitudes.
Yes.
And then I think a lot of times, a lot of Black people drink the Kool-Aid. And I do feel that it is sometimes, I do see some of those notions being passed on in through the church. And so I would love to hear more from him and seeing like how his church is actually doing, how his church is actually handling that. And it would be interesting just to see, to hear from him.
Yeah. And if we have time at the end, I'll circle back to Brother Antoine, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people to speak. So, and if not, Brother Antoine, I'll definitely be in touch with you. I'm going to send you a DM so that we can, I think this presents an amazing topic just on its own. And so I will certainly be in touch with you, offline, just to sort of, let's set that space up. I think that's a great idea, Brother Bryan. Thank you so much. And I love that you said the 60s, but baby, this is happening every day. And I also find it inside of respectability politics, isn't it? Right. And, there's a whole sort of bonnet gates that happened with Sister Monique, the comedian, right, where she made some comments about how we show up in the airport or wherever in public wearing bonnet. Exactly, like that whole thing about our behaviors and that we are somehow responsible, even though sometimes they say, well, I'm not saying we're responsible, but what can we do? Okay. But somehow responsible for the way we're mistreated. But if only we said this, did this, wore this, put this on our car, then we won't be shot or killed or excluded or disrespected or insulted. And that is inherently anti-Black, I have to say. Let's move to Sister Paula. Sister Paula, you are welcome to this space. Go ahead and talk your talk.
Hi, good morning or afternoon or whatever it is everybody is right now. Actually, now that you brought up the church, I know my husband is a pastor, and last summer, or maybe early in the pandemic, he did a sermon on the role of the church in racism, and he's currently doing a doctoral in ministry. And so he went to the history, like all the way back hundreds of years, and how the role that the church played in Europe. And I think also, in Europe, in biologicalizing race. And so I can there's a YouTube video on that. So I'll send you the YouTube video that's up there so that you can see it. So if you have that conversation, I think it'll be great if you can invite him in as well, because he's done a lot of deep research on this.
Consider him invited, my sister. Consider him invited. He's invited already.
I will do that. And when I saw the picture of who, I can't even say their names because it just disturbed me so much. And the word that really came to me was reckless. That they don't even understand that wearing those shirts is just reckless behavior, because it just compacts what we have to, the work that we're already doing. It's already hard. It's already challenging. And Dr. Bryan said it earlier. We have so much energy and resources already to try to convince people that racism exists. It's showing up in our bodies and all these different things. And now we got to add to this, well, can you now deal with this thing that these two folks said about white lives matter? It's like, no, I don't have their energy for that kind of conversation. And so it's just reckless and it's thoughtless. And it's just insane, because they are at the space, like you said, the intersectionality of, like, now they have more money, so they feel like, oh, this doesn't affect me. It does. Wait till you show up at a hospital somewhere and nobody knows who you are. And then we'll see how much your money can do for that. And I love the thing that you said about it showing up in our bodies, and as someone right now, a scientist, and I'm studying epigenetics and looking at that, and I think one of the things I wrote down was, I said, the body keeps a score. That's what you said.
Yeah.
And looking at the molecular and disease impact of chronic exposure to racism. I kind of finished that part out. But it is important for us to look at that the body does keep score. And we have to start adjusting or readjusting the score that it's keeping. And we do still have the score of the good things, and I think you mentioned that at one of the other Twitter spaces, that we also have good things in our genes. So let's not focus just on the bad things. But how can we begin to flush out and remove and purge ourselves from those negative things that have left these epigenetic tags on our body, which are just tags. They're not encoded in our DNA. And so that means that they can be expressed differently. We can change them. We can modulate them through various things, whether it's nutrition, exercise, whatever. But we can change how those epigenetic tags actually show up and how we pass them on to our future generations. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for the space, and 100% agree, and I will send you that video.
Look, I want to listen. I'm about to stand up and dance so many kinds of different dances right now, because everything you said is golden, gold and silver and titanium and all of them. Okay, platinum. Thank you, Sister Paula. Yes, these are epigenetic tags, and we can turn them off through a whole different, and that's why I always try to, at the end of our talks, yes, we talk about all these pieces, but then what is the healing? Number one in our work for, or in organizing and in change and in growth, is the healing. What are we doing for that healing? We have to be about that, the focusing on the beauty of us. Always say that we are great, we are powerful, beautiful, creative, problem solvers. Look at us, kings, queens, royalty. Look at us, doctors, teachers, scientists, innovators, inventors. What can we not do as Black people in this world? Tell me one thing that we can't do and we have not done. Do everything. Man, look. So we have to always be about the work of grounding ourselves in, yes, name it, because our realities around contending with, resisting, and the revolutionary work of pushing back against and dismantling the white violence and living under and surviving white terrorism constantly globally is very true. Inside of that, we are still creating, we are producing and reproducing in multiple ways, in more ways than one, and we are still creating, and we're still innovating, we're still dreaming despite and in spite of, and we are still rising to the top. Okay, and we must also be naming that and walking in that. We must. I think it's critical for that. I tell people, I say, listen, that multiple attempts at genocide have been made against Black people all over the world. Multiple attempts. We are still here. We are still here. And that alone, James Baldwin said it best, that is one of the reasons why we are so powerful. Listen, by history and contemporary accounts, none of us should be here. We should be super extinct. They should be talking about us in the history books like lemurs. Like, back then we had some people, there are these beautiful melaninated chocolate people. Oh, they exist at some point. At some point, we'll have you and my picture on in the museum somewhere. That's what it should be. Oh. But we are here, live and direct. Okay, and in color, pun intended. So that is to say that we are powerful and there's nothing we cannot do. So we must always be reminding ourselves of that. We are not to be played around with. We are fantastic, regardless of what we are surviving on a daily basis. So thank you for telling us and reminding us that these are epigenetic tags. They can be modulated, and we can affect how they show up in our body and in our progeny, in our children. And that we need to be intentional about that, even as we are doing. And that's why this unlearning that Brother Bryan talked about is so important. And the actions and activities and ministries and organizations like Community Healing Network, but I'm about to post that, and the NAP ministry. And if y'all know other resources, again, that's why we're a community. Go ahead and send them, post them. Let me put them up for all of us to take advantage of. And the affirmations that we read and we listen to in this space, they are so important. We need to remember who we are, regardless. And Bryan said it powerfully. We're not comparing ourselves to anybody. How can you compare like the standard, oh Lord, to what came from us? The origin of Homo sapiens came from our continent, from Africa, what then later became known as Africa. And then we're here comparing ourselves to, does the mother compare herself to her child? No, the child compares themselves to the mother. So what? No, what is the rest of the world doing compared to Black people? We have to understand that we are the standard. We have to reverse engineer these narratives. 100%. Sister Paula, don't get me started though. I'm going to violate my own time rule now because of you. So don't do that. Thank you. Brother Bryan, is there anything you want to say, please?
You said it all. You said it all.
Thank you, the love of my life.
Listening to you speak. I'm sitting here cackling a little bit. Free time.
Oh my gosh, Brother Bryan, don't encourage me. Don't encourage me. But please, if there is anything you want to say, you already know this is your space, say it. But in this, let me follow your lead and go to Pan-African Kitty, my powerful sister. Y'all, if you don't go to Pan-African Kitty space, I don't know what you're doing on Twitter, honestly. You want to hear this woman speak truth to power on a global scale. Anyway, you're about to hear her, so let me just stop talking. Pan-African Kitty, my one sister, I've missed you in a while. We haven't connected, but life is busy. But please, talk your talk.
Thank you. So actually, funny enough, the reason why I actually don't talk on those spaces, obviously, I'm not a medical professional. I'm actually a mechanical engineer, so I tend to not have a lot to contribute. But for the first time ever, you actually talked about the subject that I actually do know quite a lot, which is when you talked about, the descendants of Ham. So I don't know if you have ever mentioned in any of my spaces, but I actually was brought up in what we call the end time message. And the end time message is something that sort of like a branch in Christianity, or I'll say evangelical Christianity, that was exported from the American South to West and East Africa, typically. And we believe, well, I don't go there anymore, so I'll say they believe now. But they believe in something called the 7 church ages, and the fact that we are in the last of the 7th, and we are in an age called Laodicea. Right? And basically, according to them, this age, we are the degenerates, essentially, of all the ages. And they also believe that there are 7 prophets, and in our age, there's a prophet called William Marion Branham. He's from somewhere in the American South. I can't believe it, but I can't remember because I've been out of this religion for at least, I'll say, 10 years. And so back to why I raised my hand is about the children of Ham. One of the things that we used to get taught when we were young children, I'm from Ghana, and just by the way, I actually met another person on Twitter who also was in the similar religion. Anyway, back to what they teach us as children is, or actually as the whole congregation really, is the fact that as Black African people, we are cursed. And we are cursed because we are descendants of Ham. Ham is one of the sons of Noah. And if anyone has read the Bible, according to the Bible, Ham, when Noah got drunk, rather than going around and putting a cloth around his father, he decided to look at his father's nakedness and laugh at him. And if you any to the Bible, Noah did actually curse Ham. And according to this branch of Christianity, we Africans are descendants of Ham, and we are cursed by that curse Noah gave unto Ham. And the only way we can come out of this religion is if we decide to become fully Christians, we decide to turn to the faith. And so you, um, when basically once you have this thing indoctrinated in you, you believe that unless you actually become a Christian, and not just any Christian, by the way, because this end time message, they actually believe like sub branches like Catholicism, Pentecostal, all your other branches are essentially to straight to hellfire. So I just mentioned that, and it is more or less. By the way, when I met this person on Twitter, when we discussed this, we all came to the opinion that guys, we've actually been in a cult, and we more or less in a cult. You are not, as a woman, you are not allowed to wear earrings, and you can't chemically alter your hair, which is probably a good thing. You can't wear trousers, and can't have a relationship with someone prior to all the normal stuff here. So, and as Africans, well, as people who are in that church, we always believe that um, unless we turn to Christianity and we accept Christ in the format that is given by this end time message by this prophet William Marion Branham, and we basically will go to hell and we deserve to be in the position we are in Africa. Are not driven by other circumstances that we all know of. It is driven by by the simple fact that we are descendants of Ham. And I don't need to go into details because it looks like there's quite a lot of professional here. So I don't need to go into detail to let people know how this is detrimental to the mindset of an African person. So
oh my gosh, yes. No, thank you so much. I appreciate you for giving us that lesson. We needed to learn it, and I have too many thoughts, and I also have chest pain right now. I'm honestly just listening, and you also gave me some what do you call the memory flashes? Just flashbacks. You know, as you know, I grew up in Nigeria, and some of the language and words, and I've heard them repeated over time. Even on this app, I've heard them repeated by our own sort of parroting the messages of white supremacism and anti-blackness that were taught to them by white Americans and Europeans. One of these days, we are going to open the pants, the underwear. We're going to open the knickers of the white American evangelical church and its work of oppression and violence all over the world. I mean, in terms of whiteness and the ways that it's used to penetrate the continent of Africa, South America, Central America, to promote and seed whiteness and white supremacism in these countries. Again, the greatest export of the United States of America and Europe, white United States of America and Europe, is white supremacism all over the world. And the vehicles it has utilized, one of them has been religion and evangelical Christianity specifically. And this is one example that you've named. I've heard of other versions as well, but this beautifully encapsulates it. I want to just stop there because there's just too much to be said. I want to, Bryan, is there anything that comes up for you as you listen to that? Bryan, you're muted.
I think you summarized everything. I have no specific thoughts about that.
Yeah, That's tough. That's a tough one. But thank you so much, Sister Pan African Kitty. Please follow her. Follow everybody in this space. Support the work that they're doing, because people are doing just great work, honestly, in all forms. She also reminded me to mention. Yes, a lot of us on the roundtable have professional backgrounds or are in medicine or healthcare, but please, this is open to all of us. Please, I don't care if you did not graduate from preschool. I don't care if you are a basket weaver. You belong here, and we want to hear from you. So please, 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 it doesn't matter. This is your space. Amart belongs to you. So with that, we have these are the people that we have. Let's see who else is okay. Um, all right. And I'm going to put a time limit now. Let's try to keep our comments now to 1.5 minutes. 1.5 minutes as we go forward. We have Dr. Pascal. Then we have Alia, if I'm saying that correctly. Please teach me if I'm wrong. Then we have Sivas. And finally, Brother Ibrahim is connecting. So, and that will be at the end. But let's keep it to 1.5 minutes, please, so that we can um, you know, round up on a good time. So, Dr. Pascal, the floor is yours. Talk your talk, sis. So good to see you.
Sister, how you gonna do me like this?
I know. It's not fair. It's not fair. Beat me after. After beat me, please.
No, girl. I'm like, my intro is 1.5 minutes.
I know. Listen, I know I'm a hypocrite because you know me too. I'm bad at that, you know. So I don't know. Forgive me.
Now you can start the time.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. No, the effect of this internalized anti-blackness is real, man. You always talk about telomeres. There's actually a study that was done in 2014 on Black men. It was published in regenerative preventative medicine journal, and they looked at Black men in San Francisco. I think it was like a small study sample, but they look at the size of the telomeres in their white blood cells. And so usually telomeres are about like 8,000 base pairs. And in the Black men who had this, they didn't know that they were being tested. There was a correlation that was being done between how they've been oppressed or how they've internalized that oppression and anti-Blackness to whatever was being measured. But anyway, point is, those Black men who have internalized this anti-Blackness racism had their telomeres in their white blood cells 140 base pairs shorter than those who had more pro-Black biases, right? And so it is real. Your white blood cells are what help you fight infections, diseases, right? And so that's just one evidence of how internalized anti-Blackness actually shows up in your body, in your oh my God, I'm so stressed out. The 1 minute 30.
I know, I'm so sorry. Okay, my sister, just take a breath. Just say your mind. Take a breath and just say your mind, okay? All right, go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually pretty crazy. The other thing is there's also study that is showing that this internalized racism and oppression leads to very destructive behavior. So, like, why do people use drugs, right? Illicit drugs. It's related to that low self-esteem that they sort of internalize, right? Leads to a lot of drug abuse and suicide. The other thing is, it actually happened to me. Like, I'm doing really good in terms of when you consider standard of people who have succeeded, right? But one day I woke up, I think it was in the middle of the pandemic, I woke up in the morning, I was supposed to go to work, and I started just crying. And my husband's like, why are you crying? And then I said, I just want to peel my skin off so I can walk out and nobody will have to know I'm Black. And it took me a long time that day to actually get out of bed and be okay. But then again, I have, some other issues. But I was just so tired of being seen as different that I was like, I must be really,
wrong, right? Like there might be something fundamentally wrong. And then the other thing I wanted to add is this internalized anti-Blackness is also a reason why we're working so hard, right? This idea that we have to be twice as good is because in part we are internalized that if we don't meet those characteristics, we will not be taken seriously. Does that make sense? So this is not to negate the fact that there is the external oppression, but this internal oppression also, right? Because we are not saying, oh, why do I have to work twice as hard? Because the others don't. You're like, okay, they say that I'm not smart enough, I have to prove it to them. That's mean that we've accepted that conclusion, and now we're gonna work to disprove that, which is in itself it is wrong.
Yes.
And then one last thing that I wanted to say is that, I'm in academia and undergraduate, there's actually a strong internalized anti-Blackness among our Black students, to the point where it makes it difficult for them to work with each other, right? To have Black leaders on like campus representation, like those student groups. And so one of the ideas that I think would really help is actually having courses, right? Like freshman courses for introduction to the consequences of internalized anti-Blackness, and then give students resources to fight that as they go through their academic journey, especially in higher ed. I mean, they can do that in high school and all that, but this space is giving me this idea to actually maybe have a workshop on that for my students we have like 3% Black students at Santa Clara, so it's all white there. But something that we can practically do to help with their education, and so that would be internalized anti-Blackness would be one less issues that they have to work around or deal with as they navigate their education. But anyway, thank you for the space.
Thank you.
This is real, man. It's really horrible, but
it really is.
We're still here.
Yes, but we still here. That's right. We still here. And thank you for that. I appreciate that. And as we hear from Aliyah and Ibrahim, I would like us to start incorporating into our comments what are things you think we can do as a community to begin to counter internalized anti-Blackness. So thank you for starting to talk about the curriculum as a solution to this. And I always recognize and honor your transparency and honesty, Dr. Pascal. One of the reasons we love you, we love you so much, especially here at AMAR. But and I'm grateful that you started to talk about, hey, identifying it in your institution and then coming up with a solution. So as we move to Aliyah and Ibrahim, certainly share your talk, share your thoughts. But if you can also incorporate any thoughts, and if you don't, that's fine. But if you do have thoughts around like what we can start to do, because that's the note we're going to end on as we close out. But before we do, Brother Bryan, did you have anything to share? And Sivas, I see you too, Sivas. I'm sorry. We're going to end with Sivas. So Aliyah, Ibrahim, and then Sivas. But Brother Bryan, did you have anything to share that Dr. Pascal mentioned, especially if you have thoughts around what we can do collectively to start to end this scourge?
I love everything she said. I mean, she was dropping facts. She was just going through some of the science around, the anti-Blackness, and it's linked to telomere length and, internalized oppression, and this links to drug abuse and suicide. And, and she also talked about the ways in which it had manifested in her work and students and, the ways it manifests in her personally, right? And us, maybe how we see Black leaders, when Black people take positions of leadership, whether or not we support them and how we view them as leaders. I think there's a lot of, and she even already provided a solution, right? Talking to each other. And I think that's something that we could even begin doing in medicine spaces as well, is having these conversations amongst ourselves. How do we show up for each other in medicine? What does that look like at an interpersonal level, at an organizational level, and at a national organizational level, and at a policy level? What does it mean to show up for each other? How do you do that in a meaningful way? How do we again, I think there's room for conversations there and workshops around this. And I think that's certainly, but I think also advocating for organizationally, I think that there's also room for that too. So even pushing our organizations to create spaces for these conversations to happen. Acknowledging that this is a system. It's not just us doing it to each other, but there's a system that supports in Black people internalizing this oppression, right? And so really having them tackle as an organization the ways in which the organization encourages or promotes this kind of internalization or indoctrination of whiteness in Black minds and in their faculty.
Yes, absolutely. And Dr. Pascal, when you talked about desiring to remove your skin, and I was like, well, we have people that do that, right? Through bleaching. The bleaching industry is well, yeah, but I don't know. That story is weird, but I want to more so focus on just the average. We don't have to go to Michael Jackson. I'm just talking about like Sister Mary on the street who be bleaching. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And also brother Kofi as well. Not just the ladies, men bleach too. Around the diaspora. So when we talk about the ways that internalized anti-Blackness can show up, in the bleaching industry, and for those who don't know what bleaching is, literally chemicals that people put on their skin as lotion for whitening. They call it, and you would hear also brightening. It's all the same thing. It's like basically eviscerating your epidermis, like the topmost level layer of your skin, in order to be lighter. And we see again, we talk about this as a system, and this system has to be incentivized and supported, right? So these are the folks. The lighter you are, the more you can get opportunities in media, the opportunities in jobs, marriage and relationship opportunities to the spouse of your dreams, and so on and so forth. This is rampant throughout the continent of Africa, rampant in the Caribbean, rampant in the South Central America, and rampant in Asia. It's everywhere that white people have violently, ingratiated themselves. This is one of the pardon me, I'm having a phone call. This is one of the manifestations of that. And like we said, this is a symptom. It's not the thing. It's just a symptom of this internalization of one's own oppression. But when you talked about the removal of skin, people changing nose or the shape of lips and our hair and that which the way we were born to somehow approximate whiteness. This is absolutely an example. So I appreciate that comment. Let's go to Aliyah. Is it Aliyah or Aliyah? Please teach me how to say your name. Welcome to this space and talk your talk.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So it's Aliyah Fonseca.
All right. Nice
to have you. This space.
Thank you.
Discuss this. I don't know why, but when it started getting closer to me, I started getting really nervous. So I'm sorry if this kind of comes out scattered.
Please don't apologize. Just talk your talk. You're in a. That's okay. Good. You're in a nurturing space, Aliyah. You're in a nurturing space. We appreciate you. So just take a breath and just talk your talk. Okay. We appreciate you.
So I wanted to say a few things about some stuff that people brought up that I haven't thought about. Well, I guess I have thought about, but I'd like to address since they brought up, and then I'll move quickly into what I had wanted to say. So when the idea of, when Black people have increased money and status, how they think, they're better than other Black people. But then, someone said when you show up at the hospital, that'll be a different experience, which I have experienced myself. Just also I was thinking about when Dr. Bryan was talking about testing. My big thing is psych. I really like psychiatry, and I feel like in medicine that's where there are a lot of problematic institutionalized anti-Blackness. A lot of the supposed forefathers in both philosophy and in psychiatry are all white, and it was not Black people or other minorities were not at all thought of when these different ideas were developed. And actually, sometimes different disorders were actually politicized against Black people, like during the civil rights movement with schizophrenia and different psychotic disorders. It was actually verbiage was put into the DSM so that Black people could be targeted. And you even see today a lot of trauma that comes from being Black in America that's not addressed in mental health care systemically. And I think that's really unfortunate. And, you may be aware that less than 3% of psychiatrists in America are African American. Yet we are 4 to 6 times more likely to be diagnosed with a psychotic disorder in America versus other races. Drug abuse, suicide, all those things are mental health issues. And what I find is scary is psychiatry has a lot of power. It has the ability to put people under hold, under lockdown, because their will. You can, legally force treatments on people, ECT or different medications, get the courts involved. So with the lack of Black voices in psychiatry, it has the potential to continue harming the community, I think. And it's really hard to infiltrate that because it's so predominantly not Black. And then when I was thinking about, coming together to show up for each other and stuff like that, that can be hard because you're afraid of getting blacklisted. And then I even thought about how I didn't like that word, blacklist. It has Black in it. That's, a bad thing. You're put on the blacklist. Even international medical students. I didn't experience as much racism as I did until I went to medical school. Like, it was just everywhere in clinicals. And, I thought it was interesting that if you go to the Caribbean, which I did, although I'm American, that's seen as bad or inferior. But if you go to Ireland or Australia, you're still a foreign medical student, but that's seen as better because, those are white countries. It's not, Caribbean, which is looked at as bad. And I feel like, going back to something earlier we were talking about, I feel like even if we might not as a community realize how all of these anti-Blackness is internalized, I feel like we do. Something that Fanon talks about is language, right? There's code switching. There's the idea that your proximity to how white you sound is somehow related to your education or maybe your financial status. Even though a white person can sound white and have absolutely no education, somehow they are seen as in a better light than,
absolutely,
Black person with a PhD that quote unquote sounds Black, and how unfortunate that is. And as African American women, how our hair is, policized. I mean, there's the Crown Act and things like that. People are trying to, not be able to face discrimination with their hair, but even that's hard. Like, don't lock your hair, don't have natural hair, this and that, you won't progress. And that can all just feel so frustrating and isolating. And even when, we talk with each other about this, it still feels like, like, what more can be done? Because at the end of the day, I feel like we know what the problems are, but, who wants to give up power, right? Like, if you're the people in power, you don't want to give that up. So it's just frustrating to try to fight that power. And really quick, I know I'm just going on and on, but so the proximity to whiteness with language, I think, is really important, and how we even talk to ourselves, how we other ourselves, and the standard is whiteness, and how that's just so hard to overcome because it's like in the education, it's just so rampant that, we can try to do policy work or even critical race theory. People are trying to push in schools, but everyone sees how bad it is. and trying to balance that and your actual livelihood, not being incarcerated or blacklisted or and then the last thing, sorry, I know I'm rambling now, I wanted to say is how it can affect us physically is autoimmune diseases. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people in the Black media that have that, and although they don't know the reasons why you get it, stress is thought to be a big precursor, and we have so much stress, acknowledged or unacknowledged, that we deal with all of the time, that there are a lot of Black people in the community with all these autoimmune diseases, mm-hmm. and I wonder if a lot of it has to do with stress that we deal with daily. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much. I'm sorry I was all over the place with all of that, but.
Well, no worries. We don't apologize in this space for being who we are. And thank you so much, Aliyah, for everything that you shared. And you confirmed a lot of things we talked about, we covered. Absolutely. The internalization of anti-Blackness results in health problems and poor health outcomes from a psychiatric standpoint, which you lifted up, to physically our very cellular behavior changes epigenetically in response to the stress of internalized oppression, as well as the externalized piece, but with the focus of the internal, how that then shows up internally. These are some of the consequences why it's so dangerous. So thank you for your beautiful dissertation and offering right now, and you did a great job. If you hadn't told us, we wouldn't have known that you were nervous, and I'm so glad that you took the time to share. Brother Bryan, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think she had just taken it in. So thank you for that. I appreciate everything you had to say, and just taking it in.
Thank you so much. Now let's see if Brother Ibrahim is here. It looks like he's dropped off. So let's go ahead to the wonderful Sivas. Go ahead, Sivas. Always good to have you in the space. Go ahead and talk your talk. And we are trying to close up. So, I want to encourage everyone. And I think even though I put, a hat stop, but Brother Ibrahim dropped off. So we have time to incorporate Kemi. And then we have Dr. Noble Idea, which I have to kind of see what's, I don't see a picture. So I need to know a little bit of who you are. We're very careful who comes up on stage because we've had, white supremacists trolling, and we try to keep this space safe and nurturing for us. So I just have to make sure to know who you are, and then happy to have you be our last speaker before we close up. But go ahead, Sivas, with your offering.
Replace white supremacy, racism with justice. The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a textbook workbook for thought, speech, and action, and the accompanying word guide by Neely Fuller Jr., producejustice.com, counter-racism.com, the radio tab, and the science experiments. The COWS, it's an acronym for Context of White Supremacy, and I recommend Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, her 26 appearances on the COWS, for the Welsing Institute. Defining racism, white supremacy as a local, national, global system structure. Mm-hmm. And you can go on and find her definition, her specific definition of racism, white supremacy. Mm-hmm. So white folks doing stuff, Mm-hmm. Those are the things. The websites of Neely Fuller Jr., Dr. Welsing, she could be on YouTube, as well as the COWS, and that's C period, O period, W period, S period. And it should be a drop-down menu with the archive. I can DM anyone if they wish with the archived appearances of not only Neely Fuller and Dr. Welsing, but other guests as well. So that's the main thing, is to produce justice. That's the end goal. It's to guarantee that no one is mistreated, and guarantee the definition of justice, and guarantee that those who need help the most get the most constructive help in all areas of people activity. And I have used it directly in the first person. I'll ask, well, what is it if I'm going to eat something? How is it that this is going to guarantee I'll not be mistreated? How is this going to guarantee a constructive result? Because if I could say in my own words, what I'm hearing is, and thank you everyone for this wonderful contributions and evoking thought. What I'm hearing is, okay, well, that's what it is. And well, what do you do about it?
Mm-hmm.
How do you, I mean, okay, so that's what it is, but, I don't want it no more. I don't want it in the grocery store. I don't want to be bothered with it at all. So those are suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I've used them directly for myself as well. Replace white supremacy with justice. And like I said, counter-racism.com. And it goes into much more detail than what is here. But again, thank you for allowing me, and thank you for bringing the thoughts and evoking thoughts.
Well, I appreciate you. We always appreciate you. Also evoking thoughts on this space. Do you mind sending me the links that you referenced so that I can check those out? And I think they sound like, put them on the Jumbotron for people to check out. So, Brother Bryan.
I do that, but I'm all fumble fingers and I haven't.
Okay, what did you say it was? So this, no problem. So you said producejustice.com and counterracism.com. Are those the two links?
Counter-racism.com.
Okay, no problem. I can find them. No worries. Brother Antoine, I saw you put a thumbs down. Would you like to respond? And then Dr. Bryan, if you had anything to respond to Brother Sivas's offering.
I think I need to read the information that he was alluding to, but I think before we replace, I think it all depends on how we define justice. I think it's easy for people to talk about replacing white supremacy to justice, but then how do we define justice, and how do we make up for all the psychological and physical and economic and health disparities? So it all depends how people define justice, because it can't just be from now just moving on an equal plane. We have to do a lot of work. So looking forward to reading more material. I would love to speak about it.
I hear that. Dr. Bryan, any thoughts? We'll come back to you, Sivas. We just want to clarify that, because I also needed a little bit of clarification. When is it a language thing of we're replacing the term white supremacy or white supremacism with the word justice, or we're saying that we need to eliminate white supremacism, white supremacy, white terrorism, white violence, however you term it, so that justice can be realized. That was I wasn't really clear on that, but Dr. Bryan, go ahead with whatever you had to offer, and then Sivas will have you to to clarify.
Yeah, I also wasn't clear with that, and I think that I think that we're specifically talking about racial justice. The systematic fair treatment of people of all races results in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. Which goes beyond anti-racism, right? It's not just the absence of discrimination and inequities, but the presence of systems in our supports that can sustain racial equity by being proactive and having preventative measures in place. So it's not just the absence of racism, but the deliberate putting systems in place to actually prevent racism from happening in the first place. But I don't know if this is a semantic thing. I don't know if he actually meant actually getting rid of the term white supremacy. If that is the case, I would disagree with that tactic. I think we need to name it. But I think he I would let him clarify. And I don't think that's exactly what he meant. I hope that's not what he meant. I think it's important to name white supremacy as a system of oppression. And I think not doing that, I think, is harmful.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Brasivas, you want to go ahead and just help us to understand? We don't want to, sounds like we all on the same page where we don't want to reach any conclusions without being clear about what you meant. And if you could do it succinctly, please, just so that we can move quickly through the speaker line, we would greatly appreciate it. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I said it's like the 5 smooth stones. Replace white supremacy, and I said racism, with justice. Racism, white supremacy as an equivalent. Racism as like any other crime. You have burglars, so you have burglars. You have racism, so you have racists. And you have the phonetic equivalent, rapists, and you have rape. The exact same thing. So on that level. So rather than deal with the second thought, to be very brief, in a computer code, the commands of a virus, step A, overclock the processor by 1.5%. Step B, repeat step A. So you see the blue screen of death. But to have a counter-racist code, they know what to do and what to say, what not to do and what not to say. And so it ends up to be a word soup of all kinds of things to cause confusion. That's why I said replace white supremacy with justice. Justice as defined, guaranteeing that no one is mistreated and guaranteeing that those who need help the most get the most constructive help. Okay. And I gave an example of using that in the first person.
Okay. So, all right. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. No, I appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you for that. No, I hear you, and I appreciate you. I thank you for that. We're going to move on to the next speaker, and Kemi, and go ahead and talk your talk, sis. 1.5 minutes, please. We appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for sharing space with us. Go ahead with your offering.
Good afternoon, or good evening rather, from London. Thank you, Sister and Dr. Ijoma. I appreciate this space. I came across it very recently. I'd like to say a couple of things. So what we can do is, I think, people like yourself, people like the other professionals on this space could use this AMART space as a fundamental community of training people like myself in how to self-advocate within the medical space. So, for example, I have ADHD, which in Black women can show up. One of the symptoms can be a low iron, a chronically low iron count. Now, I've read this somewhere, but I had a GP, a doctor, challenged me quite strongly and really quite, made me, was attempting to make me feel small because she was a doctor and I wasn't. And I had to send her materials and she quickly fixed up. But not a lot of us have the confidence or the know-how to do that. So if we could come to one or a couple of places that are internationally aligned that could help us gain insight in how to, not feel intimidated by medical field. That's number one. Number two, in England here, I am a lived experienced practitioner. As such, I go into, because I don't have it for many of them, I don't care if I don't have a degree, I don't care if I've not got any training. I know better than you because I've had these conditions, and it was only diagnosed when I was 41 because, of course, we do not have access to diagnose it in the same way. That's why Leah submission made me cry because I understand exactly what she is saying. So rather than go and just go mad on the streets, I'm doing something to offset my anger. And that includes speaking truth to power, but not everyone has the time and space and the capacity to do these things. So I go in and we talk about cultural competency training. Sometimes it's BS, excuse my language, but they're going to listen and they're going to hear and they're going to know that there's many, many, many others like me that are not going to put up with it. But the fact is that the medical industry, they've ignored people like Frantz Fanon, they've ignored countless other Black people that are talking about trauma. And I loved what I said, just very quickly, about how it shows up in us. You know, I was listening to Dr. Gabor Mate on a very, very interesting, and I'll share the link here, a piece about trauma. Now, in white women, they suffer from autoimmune diseases when they're in domestic abusive situations. It's a known fact. But the medical industry suppress this information because we're not allowed to be fragile. We need to learn how to stand together, gain the insight and the information that we need in order to challenge calmly and strongly and effectively people who think they know. In this country, you can become a GP at 22. We all know that a lot of people go into the field of medicine because of the kudos, because of the guaranteed pay, because of this, that, and the other, but not because at 22, what life skills do you have to be able to tell me or any other person things need to change. Thank you. Thank you for holding space.
No, thank you. We appreciate you. I love that. I'm a lived experience expert. I'm a lived experience practitioner, and I love that so much. We talk about the degree of GSD that we give out, GSD degrees from this space, from AMART, and GSD stands for getting shit done. People in this space get shit done, honey. I don't care if you have PhD, ABC, XYD, MD, MBBS, whatever your CNN, MSNBC, honey. If you don't have a GSD degree, then I don't even know why I'm talking to you, right? If you don't have to get shit done. So now we can add a new one, a lived experience expert, right? The LEE degree, baby. And so I thank you. I'm really sorry for the negative experiences that you've had in the healthcare industry. This space is a result of understanding that, right? And that this is one contribution to our collective healing as a community, right? We know that the systems of white supremacism, the systems of the delusions of white supremacy affects us all, including those of us that are in Black bodies that are also healthcare professionals. We are also negatively impacted in so many ways, and we've discussed that here on this space. So I'm so glad that you offer, and I love that you have your voice from the UK, because we name that these realities are global. They're not just located in the US and not just located in the global minority world, which is the US and Europe, but that it is worldwide, and it shows up in a variety of ways. So we need to have these conversations. So thank you for that. And our hope is that go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Very quickly, I'm not doing this work for free. They're paying, right? So they have the money. And the other thing I need to say very, very quickly is that big business have seen the pandemic and they don't want it to happen again. So the businesses that will survive this turmoil that the world is going through, that people are trying to ignore right now, they're the ones that are going to pivot into caring about holistically caring for their employees. And that means what their mental health looks like, what their living conditions look like, what their debt looks like. And those of us that want to keep up will start developing offerings speaking to that, because they've got loads in their social corporate responsibility.
I know that's right. I know that's right.
Girl, I got to start charging then. I got to start charging this university.
Listen, look, that's a whole conversation right there. But Sister Kemi, I appreciate you, and please keep doing the great work you are, and keep charging them like maximum coins, okay? And all of us need to do the same. All right, so I appreciate you. We're gonna end on Sister Ada Bamboo. That will be our last speaker. I want to recognize those who have requested to speak. I apologize. We are way over time. The ancestors, I asked them to pinch me when I go over time. They have been slapping me at this point, using their slippers to smack my bum bum to tell me that, girl, you are basically in tomorrow at this point. And so it is time for us to round up this space to give us our time back. So we are going to end in Ada Bamboo. I do wish, and expect, please come back. And which reminds me, we will not be on next Saturday. We'll be back in the following Saturday. And that's because your girl's going to be on local TV, baby, doing exactly what we're doing, but on TV. All right. Educating our people in Detroit about important things as it relates to health equity, like exactly what we're doing, like Sister Kemi is saying. How do we educate each other to self-advocate? That is what your sister will be doing this Saturday on TV, baby, here in the greater Detroit area, for how we begin to have these conversations and increase that knowledge. So I'll be there, and I'll ask them for a link so I can share with you. But we will be back here on the round table on the 22nd, for sure. And we have an exciting topic for you. I mean, and the speakers are going to be out of this world. So definitely stay in touch. And definitely, we're going to really be working hard on building our community in between time, so that it's not just every Saturday or every other Saturday, depending on, your girls speaking and, appearance schedule, but that it will also be in between time every day, because we need this. This is the community we need every day. White supremacism and the delusional systems of white supremacy doesn't take days off, and neither should we. So I just want to lift that up and have our sister Ada Bamboo to close us out, and then we'll hear last remarks from our powerful brother, Dr. Bryan Leyva, and then we'll close out. Sister Ada, the floor is yours.
Hello, family. Hello, sister.
Hello.
My food friend.
Listen, y'all, go on my timeline and Ada Bamboo's timeline, man. If you want to see African food excellence, African food realness, so you want to go on those timelines. It's ridiculous. We are ridiculous with our food. But Ada, what do you want to say about the topic today?
Okay. First of all, I'm a midwife. Just to let you know, this is not my profession, the food.
Yeah.
It's my hobby. Because I'm a left-handed, right? When I was young, you know what it is, Catholic, Christian, master. When you don't do something with your left-handed, and I was twisted at school. Meaning that for me, the trauma started when I was a child. And I work in 22 countries. I work on a humanitarian program. I'm a reproductive health specialist. The GBV program I created in 2021 in Tanzania in the refugees camp. And here I'm also a mental health and community navigator. And I train people on doula. I train doula in California. I'm in Los Angeles. My goal is to have healing justice, because all what we went through, all what we are going through, we as specifically Black women, and we know about history of Black women who has been raped during slavery, and with the green light from the white woman, and myself, I don't even want to call them supremacy. They are racists. The supremacy is somebody who's more powerful than you on top of your head. No, they are not. If you learn our history, we are here for that. And myself, I developed a PTSD because of all what I went through as an immigrant in the United States. Even if I am educated, I'm not going to put all my degree there. Even if I am educated, I still, when I come with my head wrap and my accent, I speak 7 languages, I speak Spanish, you can hear them speaking about you. And you just say, okay, wait a minute. I speak your language. You don't even know, because I am Black. You think you can say anything to me and I'm not listening to that. I mean, I have to give my credential to tell them, hey, treat me right. Because they think that Black women or African or Black people don't feel pain. If we tell you know the story of Dr. Sims. Meaning my work is to say today, how can we heal through what my sister said, right? Dr. Ijoma, how we can heal through food, through her play, through her game, through her drinks, through who we are, through our heart, through our way of getting dressed without asking permission to be loved. How we have to be loved. Please love me. This is me. No, I don't have to take this community as a reference to exist. We have 55 countries in Africa. The diaspora is number 56. We have 6 African regions, including the diaspora. If I want to take a reference, my reference will be you, my sisters, what you are doing that leads to me. Take white people and tell them, you are my reference. You are not. Meaning that's why I want to share with you guys today how we can empower each other. In fact, it's not even empower, redirect our power, because we are already powerful.
Exactly.
How we can direct our power to help each other. I volunteer because I work in all the communities. As I say, I'm a navigator, community health navigator, and I'm a speaker too. what I'm doing right now on the mental health, I volunteer to be a mental health because I do suicide prevention. I do also peer-to-peer education to make sure that I go and see how we work on it, to implement, not just to implement, but to see how they are using their system to oppress us more, including in mental health. Meaning, my goal, I always go into their system, see what they do, and get out and say, okay, now I'm going to do for me a certain way. Meaning, thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Yes.
I always miss your program. Let's continue to talk about the jollof rice and the competition.
Oh my God, yes, because that is part of the way we how would I say, reverse engineer, the epigenetics of surviving oppression. We have to name those things that give us joy. That's why joy is so central to the work that we do. We start this space of like, where are you with your joy today? That is my own reverse engineering. I make sure that I'm dancing, I'm singing, that I am, telling our stories. I'm living out the fullness of my humanity. I'm celebrating our collective humanity, flaws and all, right? That we are creating, that we are loving. We have to, because this is the ways that we reverse engineer. I don't know about, especially the white people alive today, that anybody's changing, like the sister Leah said. Are they going? I don't know about that, and I don't. To be honest, I don't know that I'm interested in that. What I know is for us, that we are participating in. I love what you said, sister. That healing justice. That we are participating in our healing. I'm not here to be compared to anybody. I'm here to set the standard, and the standard is us. Do you understand? And I think that when we start to redirect, I love what you said, redirect our power. I love that. That we redirect our power to building each other. That is, to me, is what honestly, that is where I think it's at. Because white folks are going to white folk, and white terrorism is going to white terrorize, and then we are going to just be excellent. And there will be points here and there that might require a intersection, but then I think we get to define those points. And it's a complex, nuanced conversation. I want to recognize and honor that, make space for that. But that's why we need those safe, nurturing spaces that Brother Bryan talked about, to have that conversation amongst ourselves. So that allows me to bring in Brother Bryan to close us off with your summary, and your takeaway points, so that we can begin to close up the space. What have you heard today, Brother Bryan, that's really energized your soul? Because I'm energized. That's what, that's my selfish reason for having this MR space, because this is part of my the energy, and my soul. It feeds my soul to the point my whole family is part of it. My parents are like, yeah, we'll take your baby so that you can do your show. They call it the show. And my sister is also part of, I'll take care of the babies, and my husband, everybody, because they know that this is part of my self-care practice. And I've just been blessed. So what is your takeaway? And then sort of, where would you close us out as, in terms of next steps, right? In terms of, the solutioning that Dr. Pascal helped us to begin to converse around. And Sister Kemi has also brought up, and so many others, Sister Leah, what are next steps for us as Black peoples? What is the next steps in our healing journey to remove ourselves, to eliminate internalized anti-Blackness within ourselves and also within each other as a community? Let's end space there.
Thank you. Wow, there's just so much that was said just now. I mean, I think you kind of summarized some of the take homes, and what really energized me the most about the space was really that idea of kind of being among us, and redirecting our power to building each other, and to giving us that chance to imagine, to dream a world without where we're not kind of chasing these white standards, and we're not kind of limiting ourselves by white imagination and white standards for ourselves. I think that is really empowering for me. And to get there, we have to do the work of kind of decolonizing our minds and getting rid of some of the ways in which racism manifests in ourselves and in our beliefs and in our norms and in our expectations for ourselves and each other, right? And in our capabilities, right? I think I think earlier we were talking about how part of internalized oppression is accepting standards of white supremacy and accepting this idea that it makes it difficult for us to get resources for our own communities, right? Because we oftentimes feel that our communities are not deserving of those resources, and that if we divert resources from other communities, or if we divert attention from other communities onto our own communities, we are being unfair. And in some ways that we don't deserve that. And I think that getting rid of those thoughts is part of undoing that work. And I think we all have those at different times, right? But really really kind of pinpointing in what ways does that show up in our day-to-day lives, so that we can divert our power and our attention to each other and to our communities, without feeling shame or guilt or remorse or bad about it, right? And doing it so that we can do it like unapologetically and with the vigor and excellence that we know we can, and that our ancestors have done in the past. And so how do we live up to that, those, our ancestors, by having that freedom to dream and to kind of set our own standards and our own bars for ourselves. And so I think that really is something that I'm taking away from it. I think a lot of that begins with having conversations with ourselves and freedom dreaming, and also and I think I think one of the sisters said something about having those conversations early on, like with her students, for example, so that we know how to be in community with each other, without and I think that's something that I'm just taking with me. Something else that I'm really taking with me was mentioned, I believe it was by Kimmy. She mentioned is like, what are we doing for our patients? And I think a lot of times, one of the beautiful things about these AMR spaces is that one is that it's inclusive of everyone, patients and providers, and but I think I sometimes think about, especially now as I'm entering academia again, right now I've been thinking a lot about like what is my academic direction, and I think I'm gonna just recenter how can I do this work for my patients, right? Like how does and she brought up some great ways, right? Like how do you thinking about like how does this work translate to patient care, right? Like how do you talk to patients about how they cannot feel intimidated in the medical field? How can they self-advocate for themselves within medicine? You talked about the degree and you're getting shit done and you're the lived experience expert. Like how do you translate this work for patients in medicine? And so I've been thinking a little bit about that, and that's something that I'll take with me. I think, I guess, so those are just my takeaway points, but I would say to sum it up for me, I think one thing that is important for everyone to take home is that, internalized racism is not just the adoption of stereotypes or, racist beliefs, or, but it really is a system of oppression of internalized oppression, and it encompasses a wide range of instances, both conscious and unconscious. You're accepting a racial hierarchy in which whites are consistently ranked above Black people, and that includes not only like accepting like negative or like stereotypical ideas and beliefs about like yourself, but also you're adopting white standards and white thinking that supports the status quo. So that's like Kanye denying that racism exists, and then that leads you to then create behaviors that then support or collude with racism, right? And so, you begin to adopt like standards, like ways of behaving, of dressing, of doctoring, of professionalism, of navigating patient encounters, that directly and indirectly through a variety of mechanisms marginalize the very people who look like us. And so, and that then those standards and those behaviors are then supported by the system of white supremacy. So it is just, I think that's the biggest take home, that it's not just like the adoption of like beliefs, but it really is like a system of oppression that exists alongside white supremacy and that is supported by white supremacy.
Right. No, I think that's a very powerful point to make clear that it is its own system existing in parallel, but caused and driven also by white supremacism. But it is also its own system existing alongside in parallel with white supremacism, though produced from white supremacism, but it also is its own system. I want to that address something in the chat as well that is related to that point, and I think it's important. This is from Brother Smoking Damages, who always manages to come in late when we're about to close, and we usually want to hear from you, but either you're coming in, you request late, or you come in late, you're about to close. And I hope one of these days that we can actually, I know we've heard from you in the past, but it's been many times I know you've wanted to speak, but we just needing to close desperately. And I really hope that our next roundtable we will hear from you. But Smoking Damages did post something in the chat that says an example of anti-Blackness is having conflict with other Black people instead of white supremacists. If some people who've spoken think Kanye is working for white supremacists, why not focus on the white supremacists afraid? And I don't know at what point, brother, you came into the space, but it sounds like you may have missed a lot of the conversation. And truly, we spent time defining internalized anti-Blackness, and we spoke about, again, understanding that white supremacism is a system. We try not to focus on the individual because that obscures the role of systems and structures that produce the behaviors of the individuals that are created to actually support the system and structures that systemically advantage white-bodied people at the expense of black-bodied people and other non-white people as defined by white supremacism. Okay, so I don't know if this comment was in response to what we've been talking about, because it does counteract what we, and it's sort of not what has been going on in this space, or if you're referencing another space or another experience. But we want to be clear that we have been intentional in having a conversation where we name the system of white terrorism, white violence, white supremacism, and many in the space has been clear to say they're not comfortable with the term white supremacy, because again, language creates reality, and reality it creates language, and they don't want to, or we don't want to reinforce white hegemony by repeating that term, which is why you would hear white supremacism or the delusional system of white supremacy or white terrorism or white violence. We're all talking about the same thing, the system and structures, ideology and culture that forcefully and through violence collates power and hoards power amongst white-bodied individuals at the expense of others. And so we've been naming that, and we've been naming how that speaks to internalized anti-Blackness. So it sounds like there may be a misunderstanding of the conversation, and I encourage you to listen to the replay, to the tape, or watch the video on YouTube or on our website, as well as the replay on Twitter Space, to get a good understanding so that your response can be grounded in fact. So with that being said, and there was also a comment about let's see here, which I think is important to name. This is why I'm taking extra time. Another example of anti-Blackness is an event held in the name of a Black person who is exterminated by white supremacists. So not clear if that might be referencing another event, and have Black people there who turn the focus away from fact and instead talk about patriarchy, LGBTQ, and everything other than race. So that might be, you may be referencing another event. That's certainly not this conversation, but we did name that anti-Blackness and internalized. I want to always stay focused on the topic. The internalized anti-Blackness is one in which that can intersect with the systems of patriarchy. It can intersect with the systems of capitalism and classism. It can intersect with the systems of ableism. It can intersect with the systems of nationalism. Okay. And we didn't really unpack that because that is a very complex conversation, and we will make space for that. But we have to understand that when, that those two things can intersect and reinforce each other. Okay. And we are focusing on the internalized piece, and I'm also grateful that you shared those thoughts, because it emphasizes the need for this conversation, that we still don't have language to communicate what internalized anti-Blackness looks like and means. It really begs the need for us to continue, like Sister Kemi and many others have said, that we really do need spaces where we can, speak with each other and teach each other. Many of us are so focused, like Sister Denise said earlier, that we are so focused on the external piece, right? How these systems of white hegemony and terrorism speaking to white people about their racism and anti-Blackness. We are still learning how to speak with each other about the ways that we internalize the same things amongst ourselves. And so it's a great example for one way, but many of us, and what that speaks to me really tells of the healing that needs to be done. So I want to round up this space, and again, thank everybody. Brother Benny, Brother Benny is pretty much a owner of this space, AIM Art, Black Mental Health Alliance of Nashville. I see that Brother Mursal and Smoking Damages all on the line. We don't have time. It literally is 4:00. It will be highly unfair for me for us to continue talking. We've been on now 3 hours. That's more than enough time. We are here almost every week. So please put on the notification, make the space and the time to be here. We want to hear your voice, and we want to create the space for that voice to be shared so that we can learn from each other and unlearn with each other. And so please make the time every other Saturday, every other, but the announcement goes out. Put your alarm, or all those things that tell you and remind you of things on this app, so that you can be reminded. You could be here early so we can hear your voice. But I thank you for also taking advantage of the thread to also share your voice, because if you're not able to speak, hi Brother Kumari, I appreciate your wave. If you're not able to speak verbally, you can at least get it on the thread, and as I'm able to respond to it. So thank you for taking advantage of multiple ways to engage. Let's summarize and close out. Again, special thanks to our wonderful brother Bryan, the med peace doctor, an amazing mentee and mentor in the space of justice work inside of healthcare and medicine and the sciences and academia. And just thanking you for taking time. Brother Bryan was working on a project, and he said, Ijoma, I can give you an hour. He's been with us for 3 hours, and that's family right there. And I appreciate you. And I owe you jollof rice as a result of your sacrifice, because you are deserving in this moment. And so just want to thank you for making the time to be here with us and do all that you do. I want to shout out everybody: Kemi, Dr. Pascal, Sister Ada, Brother Antoine, Brother Sivas, Sister Aliyah, just want to shout all of you out. Just thank you, Dr. Day, and the list goes on and on. Folks that have come in and out throughout the conversation, thank you for making the time. We have talked about internalized racism, okay, and its role inside of the systems of the delusions of white supremacism, and how it also impacts our health and our wellness over and well-being. After all, for the benefit of everyone, I think it is worth repeating the definition of internalized racism, what it is not and what it is, as we close out, so that you can have that with you as you have future conversations. This also gives you an opportunity to go through the nest or the dashboard or the jumbotron for all the resources that we've shared. For those on YouTube, go on Twitter, on my account, on my timeline, you have all these resources that have been shared for you to take advantage of. And we're going to start as we build out our website, Brother Benny. Posting this as newsletters that will be coming forth, which is a reminder to please go on our website. It's on the Jumbotron, so you can sign up and you can get our newsletters where we recap these resources and also others, and curate materials of anti-racism and liberation. Because I always tell folks, decolonization, anti-racism, these are all pathways to ultimately liberation, all right, and freedom and joy and all that good stuff. And so we'll be, utilizing our website to really curate a community that lives beyond these apps. So please go ahead and sign up with your information so you can get all these materials. So what is internalized racism? We talked about this, and this is also on your Jumbotron from Sister Donna Bivens of Women's Theological Center. And her wonderful article is short. It's super short. It's less than 2 pages. Anybody can read it. But it would take you forever to digest because it's that heavy and that good. Again, internalized racism is not a few things, right? It is not simply low self-esteem, color prejudice, or colorism. It's not simply stereotyping or self-hatred. These may be and often are symptoms or results of internalized racism, but they're not the thing itself. So we don't want to confuse internalized racism with other realities that are frequently used to explain or describe dysfunction among Black people and other people and people of color, okay? What it is that it is the situation that occurs in a racist system, in a white supremacist system or delusional white supremacist system, when a racial group oppressed by racism supports the supremacy and dominance, or the perceived supremacy and dominance of the dominating group, okay, of white people, by maintaining or participating in the set of attitudes, behaviors, social structures, and ideologies that undergird the dominating group's power. Okay, so we have to be clear. And it involves at least 4 essential and interconnected elements. So there are 4 elements to internalize racism that is also connected to the way she defines, racism structurally and systemically in the first page of the article, which you'll see. 1 is in decision making, 2 is resources, 3 is standards, and 4 is naming the problem. And so when we say decision making as part of this framework for understanding internalized racism, what do we mean? It means due to racism, due to the delusional systems of white supremacy, Black folks do not have the ultimate decision-making power over the decisions that control our lives and resources. We're talking about the ultimate decision-making power. So as a result, on a personal level, we may think white people know more about what needs to be done for us than we do. On an interpersonal level, we may not support each other's authority and power, especially if it is in opposition to the dominating racial group, to white folks. Structurally, there is a system in place that rewards Black folks who support white supremacy or delusions of white supremacy and power, and coerces or punishes those who do not. When we say resources, the second element, what do we mean? Resources, broadly defined, so money, time, salaried work, are unequally in the hands and under the control of white people. Internalized racism is the system in place that makes it difficult for Black folks to get access to resources for our own communities and to control the resources of our community. We learn to believe that serving and using resources for ourselves and our particular community is not serving everybody. There is also often a self-imposed barrier that makes it difficult for us to respectfully access the resources of other peoples, particularly other people of color, other Black folks. Thirdly, when we say standards, what do we mean? With internalized racism, the standards for which is appropriate or quote unquote normal that Black folks accept are white people's or Eurocentric standards. We have difficulty naming, communicating, and living up to our deepest standards and values and holding ourselves and each other accountable to them. Too often, we instead grab onto standards set in reaction to the abuse of systemic racism. And finally, when she says naming the problem, what do we mean? There is a system in place that misnames the problem of racism as a problem of or caused by people of color, Black folks, and blames the disease that is emotional, economic, political, etc. on Black folks or people of color. With internalized racism, Black folks might, for example, believe that we are more violent than white people, right? And not consider state sanctioned political violence or the hidden or privatized violence of white people and the systems they put in place, benefit from, and support. So we have laid the foundation of what that means. And in this conversation, we also emphasize how the many ways that is dangerous, the many ways that it shows up in our health, our very telomeres, okay, in our bodies, affecting our very lifespan, our longevity, right? How it impacts mental health, physical health, emotional health, intellectual health, intellect and spiritual health, okay? How it impacts our very autoimmune system, cardiovascular system, and the list goes on. We talked about the ways that is dangerous in the fact that it impacts our behavior, our ability to make choices or to follow through with actions that work us towards our liberation, so we don't support certain policies and practices and processes, etc. Right? We talked about the way that is dangerous. Internalized anti-Blackness and internalized racism is dangerous in the sense that it maintains a system of racial hegemony inside of whiteness, how it maintains a system of the white supremacism or the delusions of white violence and terrorism, right? And we also talked about healing and productive, constructive approaches, things that we can do to begin to mitigate the impact of internalized anti-Blackness. Firstly, is to recognize it within ourselves and each other and to name it first and foremost. And then we talked about, utilizing training, beginning to create training programs and workshops and curricula in our daily lives that constitute safe and soft, nurturing, affirming spaces for ourselves so that we can collectively unlearn, heal, and teach each other, right? Right inside of the framework of abolition, healing, justice, and liberation. Okay, so that we can begin to freedom dream and imagine and operate in joyfulness and reverse engineer internalized narratives and reject the standard of whiteness even in our daily lives, and that we do that with each other, and in so doing we can recognize and ignite and reignite and redirect our power, right, within ourselves to build for ourselves. So this was a powerful conversation. I've been just blessed and fed by it. I hope you have too, that you find one person in your life, another Black person to have this conversation with honestly and fully, and you can share these resources. So when we come together, back together in 2 weeks, we have something to report. But don't wait till 2 weeks. At any time, go ahead and tweet at me, at Brother Leyva, at Sister Pascal, and tag us and DM us. And you can reach me here on Twitter and IG. You can email me and let me know like how it's gone. I want to thank folks that do that. As you take what you learn here and you apply it and translate it into your real life, y'all are sending back those praise reports. And I said, look, I had this conversation with my brother, with my cousin, with this person or that person, and look at what came out of it. Thank you. And listen, thank you for allowing us to grow this community so that these life-changing things can happen all over the world, not just in the US, but in the UK, in Europe, in Africa, in South America, in Central America, and the list goes on. So we want to thank you. We want to say, as always, love yourselves, okay? Self-love, love each other, and build community so that we can build power. I want to end in redirecting you to Community Healing Network. I have put that also on the Jumbotron. Community Healing Network is a wonderful resource that allows us to, again, defy the lie of white superiority and Black inferiority. And you will see that on their website when you go to it. and they have wonderful affirmations for us as Black people to remind ourselves of ourselves, okay? To remind ourselves of the amazing powerhouses that we are, in spite of whatever we are surviving, that we are truly amazing, powerful, outstanding people who are really, as far as I'm concerned, the standard. Okay. And so, with that, I want to close out the space. Thanking you again. We will end as we always do with music. And I just, why don't we go ahead and do our breathing exercise today? We didn't do it the past few times. So we'll end with our breathing exercise and close out with music. And that way you can avail yourself of all the resources I've shared. The last post on the Jumbotron on the dashboard or the Nest has a whole host of links from Brother Sivas, from Dr. Pascal, and a few others that sent that to me on DM, so you can, help yourself to those. Okay. So why don't we start with our breathing, and then we'll end with some music. And so with that, as we do, make sure you are somewhere safe. If you're driving, don't close your eyes, please. And say that Dr. Parr said close your eyes. Please don't do that. But if you are in a place where you are safe, go ahead and let your eyes just kind of fall. Let your shoulders fall and your chest and your body just sort of relax, okay? Place your left hand on your belly and your right hand on your chest. And what we're going to do is take a deep breath through our nose. And make sure that air is filling your chest, pushing your diaphragm down as you feel your belly rise under your left hand. And then you're going to slowly breathe out through your mouth. Take your time, take your time, take your time. As your stomach falls under your left hand. Yes. And your right hand is feeling the beat of your heart. Take another deep breath through your nose, filling your chest, dropping that diaphragm down into your stomach as it rises under your left hand. And then blow out slowly through your pursed lips. Yes, 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 yes. Feel that stomach fall. Feel that heartbeat, that beautiful heartbeat inside your body. Yes, yes, yes. Feel yourself relaxing as you let go of any internalized beliefs that tell you that you are less than because of the gift that you are as a Black person in this world. Oh, any lie that told you we don't know enough collectively, any lie that told you we are not enough somehow collectively and individually, that your body is not enough, or your brain, your mind, or the way you do things are not enough. Go ahead and let that lie go in this moment as you reverse engineer your mindset, your intellect, your spirit in your body. Take another deep breath in through your nose. Yes, yes, yes. Feel that life-giving air in every aspect of who you are, and then let go, breathing slowly through your pursed lips. Let go of those lies, let go of those limiting beliefs, and breathe in your power. Breathe in your beauty. Breathe in your love. Breathe in your joy. Breathe in your dreams. Breathe in your creativity. Breathe in your innovation. Breathe in all that you are and then some. Yes, breathe in that you are the standard. Breathe in that this all belongs to you. Wherever you find yourself, that place is yours because you are beautiful. You are Black. You are powerful. You are all that there ever needs to be, baby. Yes, yes, yes. We're going to take the last breath in through our noses into our diaphragms, pushing it down into our bellies. Yes, and now as you feel that breath in your belly, push it out slowly through your pursed lips, reminding yourself of the lineage from which you come. You come from ancestors who are fearless, powerful, beautiful innovators. Your ancestors created out of nothing. Your ancestors were the first. Your ancestors were the first doctors and scientists. Your ancestors were the first metallurgists, agricultural scientists, and experts. Your ancestors made out of nothing everything. Your ancestors were language experts, were experts of science, of math, of all that is what has made the world what is. Your ancestors, there is nothing compared to the lineage we come from. And that is the stuff you're made of. And you can do anything. It is all possible to you because you have it within you to be all that you imagine yourself to be. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Love yourselves, love each other, build community, and build power. See you in 2 Saturdays and bring at least 2 people with you. All right. B.